Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 26 years old. This happened in the Cumberland Gap area of Tennessee, deep in the Daniel Boone National Forest, during what was supposed to be a reconciling weekend with my girlfriend, Jennifer. We'd been fighting for months. Small things at first, whose turn it was to do dishes, why I stayed late at work again, whether we should move in together or keep our separate apartments. But those small cracks had widened into chasms, and we both knew we were standing at the edge of something we might not be able to cross back over. The camping trip was Jennifer's idea. A last-ditch effort to find whatever we'd lost in the noise of everyday life. Just us, no phones, no distractions, she'd said, her green eyes pleading in that way that always made my chest tight. Like when we first started dating, remember those hikes we used to take? I did remember. I remembered how she'd point out every wildflower, how she'd make me stop to listen to bird calls, how she'd curl against me by the campfire and trace patterns on my chest while we talked about everything and nothing. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped talking. We'd started just existing in the same space. The Cumberland Gap had seemed perfect, remote enough that we'd have privacy, beautiful enough that maybe we could remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. The ranger at the station had been friendly but cautious when I'd asked about the more isolated trails. "Y'all experienced hikers?" he'd asked, his weathered face serious beneath his ranger hat. "Some of them old trails back in there can be tricky, easy to get turned around, especially once the sun starts setting. And we've had some unusual reports lately." "Unusual how?" Jennifer had asked, leaning forward with the curiosity that was one of the things I loved most about her. The ranger had shifted uncomfortably. "Probably nothing. Just folks getting confused in the dark, hearing things. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in the woods at night." He'd marked a trail on our map with a red pen. "This here's the Pinnacle Trail. Leads up to a nice overlook, got a cleared camping area about 3 miles in. Stay on the marked path, don't wander off after dark, and you'll be fine." The drive to the trailhead had been tense. We'd barely spoken, the radio filling the silence with static-filled country songs that faded in and out as we wound through the mountains. By the time we parked at the small gravel lot, the sun was already starting its descent toward the tree line. "We should have left earlier," I muttered, shouldering my pack. It felt heavier than usual, weighted down with all our unspoken resentments. "We'll be fine," Jennifer said, but I caught the edge in her voice. She was nervous too, though she'd never admit it. Jennifer hated backing down from anything, even when maybe she should. The trail started easy enough, a well-maintained path through dense hardwood forest. October in Tennessee meant the leaves were just starting to turn, splashes of red and gold among the green. Jennifer walked ahead of me, her blonde ponytail swaying with each step, and for a moment it almost felt normal. Almost felt like before. But as we climbed higher, the marked trail became less obvious. The blazes on the trees grew faded and sparse, and more than once we had to backtrack when the path seemed to simply disappear into thick undergrowth. My GPS kept losing signal, the little arrow spinning uselessly as it searched for satellites that couldn't penetrate the canopy. "This isn't right," I said, stopping to check the map for the 3rd time in an hour. The paper had developed a strange, waxy feel, and the ink seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. We should have reached the camping area by now. Jennifer pulled out her phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. "Maybe we took a wrong turn." "There haven't been any turns. It's been straight up the whole time." She looked at me with that expression I'd grown to dread, the one that said I was being difficult, that I was the problem. "Maybe if you'd helped with the planning instead of just complaining." "I'm not complaining. I'm just saying something's not right here." "Something's been not right with you for months, Michael." The words hung between us like a curse. I felt the familiar surge of anger, the defensive walls going up. We were doing it again, turning our fear and frustration into weapons against each other. "Let's just keep going," I said finally. "The clearing has to be close." It wasn't. We hiked until the light began to fade, the forest growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The trees seemed to press closer to the trail, their branches reaching across the path like gnarled fingers. And the silence. That was the worst part. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals, not even the buzz of insects. Just our footsteps and our increasingly labored breathing. When we finally found a relatively flat spot to set up camp, it wasn't the marked clearing from the map. It was just a small gap in the trees, barely large enough for our two-person tent. Dark was falling fast, and we had no choice. "This will have to do," I said, dropping my pack with relief. My legs ached, and I had a growing headache from squinting at the confusing trail markers. Jennifer nodded, but she was looking around with an expression I didn't like. Her face had gone pale, and she kept glancing over her shoulder at the deepening shadows between the trees. "You hear that?" she whispered. I stopped unpacking and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard what sounded like crying. A child's voice, high and distressed, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Someone's lost," Jennifer said, already moving toward the sound. "Wait," I grabbed her arm. "We don't know what that is." "It's a kid, Michael, a kid who's lost in the woods. Kids don't hike alone out here, and why would they be crying in one spot instead of calling for help?" She pulled away from me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A kind of glazed determination, like she wasn't quite seeing me anymore. "I have to help," she said, and before I could stop her she was walking toward the tree line. "Jennifer, no!" I called after her, but she didn't slow down. I could hear the crying more clearly now, a pitiful, desperate sound that made my chest ache. But something about it was wrong. The tone was too perfect, too practiced, like a recording played on repeat. I grabbed my flashlight and followed her, but she was moving faster than seemed possible, practically gliding between the trees. The beam of my light kept losing her, catching only glimpses of her pale jacket as she moved deeper into the darkness. "Jennifer, stop! This isn't safe!" The crying stopped abruptly, and I heard Jennifer's voice, distant but clear. "Oh, it's okay, sweetie. I'm here to help." Then silence. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes and scratching my face. My flashlight beam swept frantically back and forth, but I couldn't see Jennifer anywhere. The forest had swallowed her completely. "Jennifer!" I shouted, not caring what might hear me. "Jennifer!" No response. Even my own voice seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, as if the darkness was absorbing sound itself. I searched until my flashlight began to dim, until my voice was raw from calling her name. The forest felt alive around me, watching, waiting. Every shadow seemed to move just outside my vision, and I kept hearing soft footsteps that stopped whenever I tried to follow them. Finally, exhausted and terrified, I made my way back to our campsite. I'd left a small LED lantern hanging from a tree branch, and its pale light was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I fell to my knees beside our tent, my hands shaking as I tried to figure out what to do. My phone had no signal. My GPS was still spinning uselessly. I could try to hike out in the dark, but I'd probably just get more lost, and what if Jennifer came back while I was gone? I spent the night sitting beside our cold fire ring, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly. Every sound made me jump. The creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig that might have been a footstep. I kept my flashlight close, checking the tree line constantly, praying to see Jennifer's familiar silhouette walking back toward me. When dawn finally came, gray and filtered through the thick canopy, I felt like I'd aged years in a single night. I was preparing to break camp and try to find help when I heard her voice. "Michael, I'm back." I spun around, and there she was, standing at the edge of our campsite like she'd just stepped out to use the bathroom. Her clothes were clean, her hair neat, her face calm. She looked exactly the same as when she'd left, except for her eyes. They were completely black. Not just the pupils, everything. Black from edge to edge like polished obsidian. "Where were you?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. "I looked everywhere. I called for you all night." She tilted her head slightly, and when she smiled, it was too wide, stretching her mouth in a way that human lips shouldn't move. "I found the child," she said in Jennifer's voice, but the words sounded wrong, like she was speaking through water. Poor little thing was so lost, so scared. But I helped her. "What child? There was no child, Jennifer. That sound. It wasn't human." The thing wearing Jennifer's face laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. It was musical and horrible, like wind chimes made of bones. "Oh, Michael, you always were too suspicious, too careful. That's why we've been having problems, isn't it? You never trust anything." She moved closer, and I noticed she wasn't walking quite right. Her feet seemed to glide across the ground, not quite touching the earth. And her scent. Jennifer always smelled like the vanilla lotion she used, but this thing smelled like rich earth and decay, like something that had been buried and dug up again. "You're not Jennifer," I whispered, backing away. "Of course I am." She reached toward me, and I saw that her fingernails had grown longer, black like her eyes. "Who else would I be?" I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and crashed through the forest like a wild animal. Behind me, I heard that terrible laugh again, echoing through the trees like a sound effect from hell. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Then I walked. Then I stumbled. The forest seemed to shift around me, paths appearing and disappearing, the same landmarks passing by multiple times. The sun barely penetrated the canopy, and I couldn't tell if hours or minutes were passing. When I finally collapsed beside a small stream, gasping and shaking, I heard footsteps approaching through the leaves. Slow, deliberate footsteps that I recognized. "Michael," Jennifer's voice called. "Why did you run from me? I'm hurt. I thought you loved me." I pressed myself against a large oak tree, trying to become invisible. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by a sound I couldn't identify at first. Then I realized it was humming. The thing was humming a lullaby in Jennifer's voice, but the tune was somehow wrong, the notes bending in ways that made my teeth ache. "I know you're here," it said, and I could hear the smile in its voice. "I can smell your fear. It's such a lovely smell, Michael, sweet and sharp like copper pennies." A shadow fell across the stream, and I looked up to see Jennifer standing on the opposite bank. But this wasn't even pretending to be human anymore. Her skin had gone gray-white, like old bone, and her black eyes reflected the dim light like an animal's. When she opened her mouth, I saw rows of teeth that definitely hadn't been there before, sharp, needle-like points that gleamed wetly. "Come here," she said, and her voice had a pull to it, a compulsion that made me want to stand up and walk to her. "Come to me, Michael. Let me show you what I learned in the dark." I bit down on my tongue hard enough to draw blood, using the pain to break whatever spell she was trying to weave. The metallic taste in my mouth seemed to clear my head, and I scrambled to my feet. "You're not real," I said, louder than I intended. "Jennifer is gone. You killed her." The thing that looked like Jennifer threw back its head and laughed again, and this time the sound was purely inhuman, a shriek like tearing metal that sent birds exploding from the trees in all directions. "Killed her," it said when the echoes died away. "Oh, Michael, I didn't kill her. I became her. I wore her like a favorite dress. Would you like to see?" Before I could answer, its face began to change. The skin rippled and flowed like water, and for a horrible moment I saw something underneath, something with too many angles and eyes that burned like stars. Then Jennifer's face snapped back into place, but wrong, like a photograph that had been torn and taped back together badly. "She fought so hard," it whispered, and its voice was layered now, Jennifer's familiar tones mixing with something else, something ancient and hungry. "Right up until the end. She kept calling your name. Michael, she said. Michael, help me. But you couldn't help her, could you? Just like you couldn't help our relationship. Just like you can't help yourself now. I turned and ran again, crashing through the undergrowth without caring about the direction. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes, but I didn't slow down. I could hear it following me, sometimes sounding like Jennifer's normal footsteps, sometimes like something much larger moving through the trees. The forest began to change around me as I ran. The trees grew taller and more twisted, their bark turning black and slick. The air became thick and hard to breathe, tasting of sulfur and rotting flowers. And the darkness, even though it should have been midday, the shadows were growing deeper, as if night was falling from the inside out. I realized with growing horror that I wasn't in Tennessee anymore. I wasn't anywhere that existed on any map. The thing had pulled me into its territory, its hunting ground, and now I was trapped in whatever nightmare realm it called home. When I finally stopped running, I was standing in a clearing that hurt to look at. The geometry was wrong. Trees that leaned at impossible angles, a sky that seemed too close and too far away at the same time, shadows that fell upward instead of down. And in the center of the clearing was Jennifer. The real Jennifer. She was hanging from a tree that definitely hadn't been there a moment before, suspended by what looked like spider silk. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, but I could see the slow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but barely, like she was caught in some kind of hibernation. "Do you like my collection?" The thing's voice came from everywhere at once. "She's my newest addition. So young, so full of hope and fear. I'll keep her dreams forever." I looked around the clearing and realized there were others. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all hanging from impossible trees and cocoons of that same silk. Men, women, children, all with that same peaceful expression, all breathing slowly like they were trapped in the deepest sleep. "Let her go," I said, though my voice sounded weak and pathetic even to me. "Oh, but I can't do that," the thing said, and now I could see it properly for the first time. It stood about 10 feet tall, composed of shadows and starlight and teeth. Its form kept shifting, sometimes looking like a massive spider, sometimes like a tree with human limbs, sometimes like nothing I had words for. She's part of me now, just like all the others, just like you will be. It reached toward me with arms that stretched like taffy, and I felt that same compulsion as before, the urge to just give up and let it take me. It would be easier, I thought. No more pain, no more fear, no more guilt about all the ways I'd failed Jennifer, all the small cruelties and neglects that had driven us apart. But then I heard her voice. The real Jennifer, not the thing's imitation. "Michael," she whispered so faintly I almost missed it. "Don't let it win. Don't let it take you too." Her eyes were open now, looking at me with desperate love and terror. And I saw something in her gaze that I'd been too proud or too scared to acknowledge before. She still loved me. Despite everything, despite all our fights and failures, she still loved me enough to use whatever strength she had left to try to save me. That realization hit me like lightning, burning away the fear and despair that had been dragging me down. I looked around the clearing with new eyes, and suddenly I understood. This thing fed on negative emotions. Fear, anger, despair, hopelessness. That's why it had been so easy for it to take Jennifer when we were fighting, when we were both vulnerable and hurt. That's why it wanted me to give up. But love, real love, the kind that forgives and fights and refuses to let go, that was something it couldn't understand or consume. "I love you," I said to Jennifer, loud enough for the thing to hear. "I love you, and I'm going to get you out of here." The creature recoiled as if I'd hit it with a physical blow. Its form wavered and became less solid, and I heard something like pain in its inhuman shriek. "You can't," it hissed. "She's mine now. They're all mine." "No," I said, and I felt strength flowing back into my limbs. "They're not. Love doesn't die. Love doesn't give up. and I love her more than you could ever understand." I walked toward Jennifer's tree, and with each step, the things holed on the clearing seemed to weaken. The impossible geometry straightened out, the upward-falling shadows corrected themselves, and normal sunlight began to filter through the canopy. The creature made one last, desperate attempt to stop me, lunging forward with claws extended, but when it touched me, it simply passed through, like I was made of light instead of flesh. Its power over me was broken. I reached Jennifer's tree and began tearing at the silk that held her. It came away easily now, dissolving at my touch like cotton candy. She fell into my arms, solid and warm and real, and I held her against my chest as she gasped back to full consciousness. "Michael?" she whispered, her green eyes clear and human again. "How did you—" "Love," I said simply. "Love brought me to you." Around us, the other cocoons were beginning to dissolve as well. The creature's victims were waking up, looking around in confusion as they found themselves back in their own times and places. The thing itself was shrinking, becoming transparent, its form breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. "This isn't over," it whispered as it faded. "There will be others. There are always others who have lost their way, lost their love. I will be waiting." Then it was gone, and we were standing in a normal forest clearing in Tennessee, with normal trees and normal shadows and a normal sky overhead. My GPS came back online with a cheerful beep, showing that we were less than half a mile from the main trail. We hiked out in silence, holding hands, neither of us ready to talk about what had happened. When we reached the ranger station, the same weathered ranger looked up from his paperwork with mild surprise. "Y'all are back early," he said. "Everything go all right?" "Fine," I said quickly. "Just decided to cut it short." He nodded, but I caught him studying our faces with shrewd eyes. "Probably for the best," he said finally. "Like I said, folks have been having some unusual experiences out there lately, but most of them come back with a new appreciation for what they've got at home." As we drove away from the mountains, Jennifer finally spoke. "That thing," she said quietly. "It showed me things, made me see all the ways we've been hurting each other, all the times we chose pride over understanding. It fed on that, didn't it?" I nodded. "I think so. It took our worst impulses and turned them into weapons." "But you didn't let it win." "Neither did you. You fought it from the inside, gave me the strength I needed to find you again." She squeezed my hand. "I love you, Michael. I know we have problems, but I love you. And I think maybe the problems aren't as big as we've been making them." "I love you too," I said, and meant it with every cell in my body. "And you're right. We can fix things. We can do better." As we descended from the mountains, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. A tall, dark shape standing at the edge of the forest, watching us leave. But when I blinked, it was gone, and I decided not to mention it to Jennifer. Some things are better left in the dark where they belong. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony overlooking a lake in the valley. Not the mountains. We both avoid the mountains now. But every night when I hold Jennifer in my arms, I remember that moment in the clearing when love proved stronger than fear, when choosing each other meant choosing life itself. And sometimes, in the depths of winter when the wind howls through the trees, I think I can hear something calling from the distant mountains, a voice like breaking glass and falling leaves, promising that it's still waiting, still hungry, still hoping that someone will choose despair over love. But not us. Never us again. We know now what we have, and we know what we almost lost. The thing in the forest taught us something it never intended. That love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. A choice you make every day, in every small moment, to put the other person's heart above your own pride. And as long as we keep making that choice, as long as we keep choosing each other, the darkness can call all it wants. We won't be listening. The end. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Cherokee National Forest, deep in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, during what was supposed to be a simple 3-day camping trip with my closest friends. I've told this story to therapists, to police, to anyone who would listen, but nobody believes the truth. They think trauma has warped my memory, that grief has made me delusional. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to Emma. It was late September, the kind of crisp autumn that makes Tennessee's mountains look like they're bleeding gold and crimson. Emma Chen had been planning this trip for months, obsessing over topographical maps and weather reports with the kind of intensity she usually reserved for her doctoral thesis in anthropology. She'd discovered an obscure trail system near Cataract Falls, one that barely appeared on modern maps but was mentioned in some old Cherokee legends she'd been researching. "It's perfect," she'd said, spreading the weathered papers across my kitchen table. "Isolated, beautiful, and historically significant. The Cherokee called this area Enviachai Asgaya, the place where spirits dwell." Marcus Webb, my boyfriend of 2 years, had rolled his eyes at Emma's enthusiasm. "As long as there's good fishing and cold beer, I'm happy." Marcus was practical that way, grounded in the physical world in a way that balanced out Emma's more ethereal interests. He worked construction, had hands that could fix anything, and possessed an unshakable confidence that I found both comforting and sometimes irritating. Jenna Kim, Emma's roommate and our 4th member, had been the voice of caution. "Are you sure about this? Some of those old trails aren't maintained. What if we get lost?" Jenna taught elementary school and approached everything with the kind of careful planning that came from being responsible for 26 third graders. She was the one who insisted we each carry 2 GPS units and emergency beacons. I should have listened to Jenna. We set out on a Friday morning, driving Marcus's pickup truck up Highway 64 until we reached the obscure Forest Service road Emma had found. The road was barely more than 2 tire tracks cutting through dense undergrowth, and we had to stop twice to move fallen branches. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals. Just the sound of our engine and the crunch of the leaves under our tires. "GPS says we're still on track," Jenna announced, though I noticed her voice carried a note of uncertainty. She was staring at the screen with a slight frown. "Mine's acting weird," Marcus said, tapping his phone. "Shows us in the middle of a lake." Emma laughed from the passenger seat. "Technology fails where the old spirits still walk. That's what my Cherokee contact told me. The electromagnetic properties of certain mineral deposits can interfere with modern navigation." I wish I could say that was the first warning sign, but honestly, Emma's dramatic flair was so familiar that none of us took it seriously. She'd always been drawn to the mystical, the unexplained. It's what made her such a compelling friend and such a brilliant anthropologist. It's also what got her killed. We reached the trailhead around noon. There was no parking area, just a slightly wider spot where the road ended at a wall of ancient hemlocks and oaks. A rusted metal sign, so weathered the text was barely legible, marked the beginning of what Emma insisted was the Cataract Falls Trail. The path immediately plunged into forest so thick it felt like entering a cave. "Beautiful," Emma breathed, shouldering her heavy pack. She'd brought enough equipment to document everything. Cameras, sound recording devices, geological sampling tools. "Look at these trees. Some of them have to be 300 years old." The trail was narrow and overgrown, forcing us to walk single file. Emma led, consulting her maps and a compass that seemed to spin randomly. I followed, then Jenna, with Marcus bringing up the rear. The forest pressed in on all sides, a maze of trunks and low-hanging branches that created a green twilight even at midday. "This doesn't feel right," Jenna said after we'd been walking for an hour. "According to the GPS, we should have reached the first stream crossing by now." "GPS is wrong," Emma called back without turning around. "I know exactly where we are." But I was beginning to doubt that. The path seemed to fork and rejoin randomly, sometimes disappearing entirely into patches of dense undergrowth that we had to push through. Emma navigated these obstacles with strange confidence. as if she'd walked this route before, though I knew she hadn't. "Emma," I called, "maybe we should stop and get our bearings." "Just a little further," she replied. "I can hear the falls." I listened, straining to catch the sound of rushing water, but heard only the wind through leaves and the distant call of a crow. Still, we followed Emma deeper into the forest, trusting her expertise even as my unease grew. We finally stopped to make camp around 4 o'clock, in a small clearing Emma claimed was perfect despite its strange characteristics. The ground was covered in perfectly circular patches where no grass grew, just bare earth that felt cold under our hands. The trees surrounding us were all the same species, massive oaks, and they grew in an almost perfect circle around the clearing. "Weird how uniform everything is," Marcus observed, setting down his pack, "almost like it was planned." Emma was already unpacking her equipment, her excitement palpable. "This is a sacred grove. See how the trees form a natural circle? The Cherokee would have used this for ceremonies. The bare patches are where they built fires." Jenna was studying her GPS again, frowning. "This is really strange. According to this, we're about 15 miles north of where we should be. And look at this." She showed me the screen, where our location appeared as a blank space surrounded by terrain features that didn't match what we could see around us. "Mountain minerals," Emma said dismissively. "I told you electronics would be unreliable here." But as we set up our tents, I noticed other oddities. The temperature in the clearing was at least 10 degrees colder than it had been on the trail. Our watch hands moved sluggishly, and Jenna's digital watch kept resetting to 12 AC. Most unsettling, the shadows fell wrong, pointing east when the sun was clearly setting in the west. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" Marcus asked as we gathered around our camp stove for dinner. He was right. The normal sounds of evening in the forest, insects, birds settling for the night, the rustle of small animals, were completely absent. It was as if we were the only living things for miles. Emma seemed oblivious to our growing unease. She spent the evening taking photographs and measurements, making notes in a leather-bound journal she'd brought specifically for this trip. "This place is exactly what I was hoping to find," she said. "Untouched, pristine, still holding the energy of the people who once lived here." We tried to build a campfire after dinner, but the wood wouldn't catch, no matter how much kindling we used or how carefully we arranged it. Even when Marcus got a flame going with lighter fluid, it burned strange, blue-white instead of orange and completely silent. No crackling, no popping, just an eerie, wavering light that cast strange shadows. "That's not normal," Jenna whispered, staring at the unnatural flames. Emma was fascinated. Spectral analysis would be amazing. The minerals in the wood, maybe some kind of natural gas seepage. This place just keeps getting better. We went to bed early, partly because of the cold and partly because the weird fire was making everyone nervous. I shared a tent with Emma, while Marcus and Jenna had their own. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I kept hearing sounds that didn't belong. A soft scratching against the tent fabric, footsteps circling our campsite, and what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. "Emma," I whispered, "are you awake?" No response. I reached over to shake her shoulder and found her sleeping bag empty. I sat up, heart hammering. "Emma?" Still no answer. I fumbled for my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The campsite was empty, our strange fire reduced to cold ashes. No sign of Emma anywhere. "Marcus, Jenna," I called, my voice cracking. They emerged from their tent looking groggy and confused. "Where's Emma?" Jenna asked. "I don't know. She was here when I fell asleep, but now—" I gestured helplessly at the empty clearing. We spent the next 2 hours searching, calling Emma's name and sweeping our flashlights through the surrounding forest. The beams seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, illuminating only a few feet in any direction. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our own voices and the crunch of leaves under our feet. "Maybe she went to pee and got turned around," Marcus suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Emma knows these mountains, I said. She wouldn't wander off in the dark. But there was no trace of her. No footprints in the soft earth around our campsite. No broken branches to show which direction she might have gone. It was as if she had simply vanished. We eventually gave up the search and huddled together in Marcus and Jenna's tent, none of us willing to sleep alone. I dozed fitfully, jolting awake every time the wind moved through the trees or a branch creaked. But toward dawn, I was awakened by a different sound, someone unzipping our tent. "Emma," I whispered. "It's me," came her familiar voice. "Sorry I worried you. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk." Relief flooded through me as Emma crawled into the tent. In the dim pre-dawn light, she looked normal. Same dark hair, same slight build, same worn hiking clothes. But something felt off. "Where did you go?" Jenna asked. "We looked everywhere." "Just to the falls," Emma said. "They're incredible. You have to see them." "The falls?" Marcus sat up. "Emma, we didn't find any falls yesterday." "And you were gone for hours." Emma laughed, but it sounded wrong somehow. Too high, lasting a beat too long. "Time moves differently here. I told you this place was special." "What do you mean, time moves differently?" I asked. "I was only gone for a few minutes," Emma insisted, "just long enough to find the falls and take some pictures." But her camera bag was empty when she opened it. No photos, no equipment that she'd claimed to have used. And when I looked at my watch, it was 6:30 a.m. Emma had been gone for nearly 8 hours. We broke camp quickly that morning. Whatever had happened to Emma, wherever she'd been, I wanted to get back to civilization and figure things out. But as we packed, I noticed more strange details about my friend. Emma's hiking boots were completely clean, despite her claim of walking to waterfalls in the middle of the night. Her clothes showed no sign of moisture, no bramble tears, no dirt. Most disturbing, she moved differently. Too fluid, too quiet, like she was floating just slightly above the ground. "Emma," I said carefully, "are you feeling okay?" She turned to look at me, and for just a moment her face was wrong. Her eyes were too bright, too knowing, and her smile was too wide, stretching her features in a way that human faces weren't meant to stretch. "I feel perfect," she said. "Better than I've ever felt in my life." The expression shifted back to normal so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. We started hiking out but immediately encountered problems. The trail we'd followed yesterday was gone. Not overgrown or hard to find. Completely absent, as if it had never existed. The forest around us looked different too, the trees arranged in patterns that seemed both random and oddly purposeful. "This isn't right," Jenna said, consulting her GPS. "According to this, we're moving deeper into the forest, not toward the road." "The GPS is broken," Emma said with that strange, too bright laugh. "I know exactly where we are." But as the hours passed, it became clear that Emma was leading us further from safety, not toward it. The forest grew denser, darker, more oppressive. The temperature dropped steadily, despite the bright autumn sun that should have been warming us. Our breath began to mist, and frost formed on the leaves around us. "Emma, stop," Marcus finally said, grabbing her arm. "We need to figure out where we are." The moment his hand touched her, Emma's head whipped around with unnatural speed. Her neck twisted too far, nearly 180 degrees, and her eyes had gone completely black. "Don't touch me," she said, and her voice was layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Don't ever touch me." Marcus jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. "What the hell, Emma?" She blinked, and her eyes were normal again. "Sorry, I'm just tired. This place affects people differently." "What place?" Jenna demanded. "Where are we, Emma? What happened to you last night?" "I found what I was looking for," Emma said simply, "and it found me." That's when I noticed the smell. Subtle at first, like compost or mulched leaves, but growing stronger. It was the smell of decay, of things rotting deep in the earth. and it was coming from Emma. "We're leaving," I announced. "Right now. We'll follow our own tracks back to the clearing and figure out the real trail from there." But when we turned around, our footprints were gone. The forest floor showed no sign that we'd ever passed through. Even more disturbing, the path behind us had changed. Where there had been a clear route between the trees, now there was only dense undergrowth and fallen logs. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "Forests don't just rearrange themselves." Emma laughed again, that awful, too long sound. "You're thinking too linearly. This place exists in layers, in dimensions that intersect and overlap. The Cherokee understood that. They knew some places exist outside normal space and time." "Stop talking like that," Jenna snapped. "You're scaring us, Emma, and you're not making sense." "I'm making perfect sense," Emma replied. "You just don't understand yet. But you will." We had no choice but to keep following Emma. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, no landmarks, no sign of human presence. The forest seemed to shift around us as we walked, paths appearing and disappearing, clearings that were there one moment and gone the next. By noon, we were completely lost. Our GPS units had given up entirely, showing only error messages or blank screens. Our watches had stopped working. Even our compasses spun uselessly, unable to find magnetic north. "I need to rest," Jenna said, sitting down heavily on a fallen log. "And I need water. I'm almost out." I checked my own supply and realized we all were. The stream crossings Emma had promised never materialized. The waterfalls she claimed to have found were nowhere to be seen. "There's a spring just ahead," Emma said. "Crystal clear, perfectly safe to drink." But when we reached the spot she indicated, there was no spring. Just more forest, more shadows, more of that smell of decay that followed Emma like a cloud. "You're lying," Marcus said bluntly. "There's no spring, there's no water, and I don't think you know where we are any better than we do." Emma's expression went flat, emotionless. "I know exactly where we are. We're home." "Home?" I stared at her. "Emma, we live in Knoxville. This isn't home for any of us." "It is for me," she said. "It has been since last night, since I went into the hollows and met the others." "What others?" Jenna asked. "The ones who have been waiting. The ones who were here before the Cherokee, before anyone. They've been so lonely, Sarah. Lonely for so long. But now they have me, and soon they'll have all of us." That's when I realized Emma's feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering, just an inch or two above the forest floor, moving with that same unnatural fluidity I'd noticed that morning. "You're not Emma," I whispered. She turned to face me fully, and her features began to shift. Her face elongated, her jaw unhinging like a snake's. Her eyes sank deep into their sockets, becoming black holes that reflected no light. Her fingers stretched into claws, and her skin took on a grayish, corpse-like pallor. "Emma is safe," the thing said in a voice like grinding bones. "Emma is with us now, learning what it means to be eternal. She sent me to bring her friends home." Marcus grabbed a thick branch from the ground, brandishing it like a club. "Stay back. Whatever you are, stay the hell away from us." The creature that wore Emma's face laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. "You cannot fight what you cannot understand. This forest belongs to us, has always belonged to us." The Cherokee knew to stay away, to warn their children with stories of the Keklikudla, the hollow ones. But you ignored their wisdom. It began to move toward us, not walking but flowing like mist over the ground. Jenna screamed and scrambled backward, tripping over roots and fallen branches. Marcus swung his makeshift weapon, but it passed right through the creature without resistance. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jenna's hand and pulling her to her feet. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear that awful laughter and a sound like dozens of feet following us through the undergrowth. The creature wasn't alone anymore. There were others, moving through the trees around us, herding us like animals. I don't know how long we ran. Time had no meaning in that place. The sun didn't move in the sky. The shadows never shifted. We might have been running for minutes or hours or days. But eventually, we burst into another clearing, and there was Emma. The real Emma. She was hanging upside down from a massive oak tree, wrapped in what looked like spider silk but glowed with a sickly phosphorescent light. Her eyes were open, staring at us with desperate terror. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. "Emma!" Jenna started toward her, but I grabbed her arm. Around the clearing stood dozens of figures, the creatures that lived in the hollows. They wore the faces of people, but the faces were wrong, distorted, like masks that didn't quite fit. Some I recognized from missing persons posters I'd seen over the years. Hikers and campers who had vanished in these mountains and never been found. But they weren't missing. They were here, transformed into something else, something hungry. The creature wearing Emma's stolen face emerged from the tree line behind us. "You've found our collection," it said with false pride. "Each one was once like you, lost, frightened, alone. Now they are part of something greater." "Let her go," Marcus demanded, though his voice shook. "Oh, we will," the creature replied. "Soon she'll be able to walk among you as I do now, to hunt as I do now. But first she must learn to hunger as we hunger." That's when Emma began to scream. The sound that came out of her wasn't human. It was the cry of something being torn apart at the molecular level, dissolved and rebuilt into something else. The silk around her body pulsed with that same sick light, and I could see her skin beginning to change, taking on the same grayish pallor as the creatures around us. "Stop it!" I shouted. "Please, just stop!" "It doesn't hurt for long," the creature said almost gently. "The hunger replaces the pain. The need to feed overwhelms everything else. Soon you'll understand." The other creatures began to close in, and I realized we had only one chance. I still had my emergency flare in my backpack, something Jenna had insisted we all carry. I pulled it out and triggered it, filling the clearing with brilliant red light. The creatures recoiled, shrieking and covering their stolen faces. In that moment of confusion, Marcus threw his weight against the tree where Emma hung. The ancient wood groaned and began to crack. "The light!" I screamed to Jenna. "They hate the light!" Jenna fumbled for her own flare while I held mine high, sweeping it back and forth to keep the creatures at bay. The phosphorescent silk around Emma began to smoke and dissolve in the red glare. Marcus gave the tree another massive shove, and it toppled with a crash that shook the entire forest. Emma fell with it, rolling away from the dissolving silk cocoon. But when she stood up, I could see the transformation had already begun. Her eyes were too bright, her movements too fluid. "Sarah," she whispered, and her voice was layered with harmonics. "Help me." I wanted to. God, how I wanted to reach out and pull my friend to safety. But I could see the hunger already growing in her changed eyes, the way she was looking at us like prey. "I'm sorry," I whispered, backing away. Emma, or what Emma was becoming, let out a wail of despair that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. But the creature wearing her original face only laughed. "You see," it said, "she is already more like us than like you. Soon the transformation will be complete, and she will thank us for freeing her from the weakness of humanity." That's when Jenna's flare ignited, bathing the clearing in a second blast of red light. The creatures scattered like roaches, flowing back into the shadows between the trees. In the brief reprieve, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A narrow gap in the tree line, barely visible but leading upward toward what might be a ridge. "This way!" I grabbed Marcus and Jenna, and we ran for the gap, leaving Emma behind. I still wake up screaming sometimes, thinking about that choice, about leaving her there with those things. But I knew, somehow I knew, that the Emma we'd come here with was already gone. What remained was becoming something else, something that would hunt us as soon as the transformation was complete. We climbed through the night, using our remaining flares to light the way and keep the creatures at bay. They followed us, always just out of sight but close enough that we could hear them moving through the trees. Sometimes they called to us in voices we recognized. Emma begging us to come back, our parents asking why we'd abandoned them, our own voices telling us to give up and rest. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. Dawn found us on a rocky outcrop above the tree line, exhausted and dehydrated, but alive. Below us, the forest looked normal, just trees and mountains stretching to the horizon. No sign of the supernatural maze we'd escaped. It took us 2 more days to find our way back to civilization. We told the rangers that Emma had fallen into a ravine and that we couldn't recover her body. They organized search parties, but of course, they found nothing. The trail we'd followed into the forest didn't exist on any of their maps. The clearing where we'd camped couldn't be located. The official report listed Emma Chen as missing, presumed dead. Her parents held a memorial service. Her doctoral advisor dedicated her thesis publication to her memory. Life moved on, as it always does, closing over the hole left by her absence. But I know she's not dead. She's something else now. Something that wears her face and shares her memories but hungers for things human beings were never meant to hunger for. Sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls where no one speaks, but I can hear breathing that sounds almost like her voice. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of a familiar figure in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight. Marcus and I broke up 6 months later. The strain of what we'd experienced, the guilt of leaving Emma behind, the knowledge that no one would ever believe us. It was too much for our relationship to survive. Jenna moved across the country and changed her name. We don't talk anymore. The silence is easier than trying to pretend we're the same people who went into those mountains. But I still dream about the Cherokee National Forest, about clearings where the shadows fall wrong and time moves in circles, about creatures that wear stolen faces and hunger for the warmth of living flesh, about my best friend, transformed into something alien and terrible, still calling my name from the hollows between the worlds. The Cherokee called that place Envi Asgaya, where spirits dwell. But they were wrong about one thing. The spirits don't just dwell there. They hunt. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can still hear Emma calling my name from somewhere deep in the darkness, promising that if I just come back to the forest, if I just let the creatures find me, I'll never have to be alone again. I'm thinking about it more and more lately, about going back, about going home. The hunger is starting to feel familiar, and sometimes when I look in the mirror my reflection doesn't quite match the movements I'm making. Sometimes I think the transformation didn't end in those mountains. Sometimes I think it followed me home. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Cherokee National Forest, deep in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, during what was supposed to be a simple 3-day camping trip with my closest friends. I've told this story to therapists, to police, to anyone who would listen, but nobody believes the truth. They think trauma has warped my memory, that grief has made me delusional. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to Emma. It was late September, the kind of crisp autumn that makes Tennessee's mountains look like they're bleeding gold and crimson. Emma Chen had been planning this trip for months, obsessing over topographical maps and weather reports with the kind of intensity she usually reserved for her doctoral thesis in anthropology. She'd discovered an obscure trail system near Cataract Falls, one that barely appeared on modern maps but was mentioned in some old Cherokee legends she'd been researching. "It's perfect," she'd said, spreading the weathered papers across my kitchen table. "Isolated, beautiful, and historically significant. The Cherokee called this area Envi Asgaya, the place where spirits dwell." Marcus Webb, my boyfriend of 2 years, had rolled his eyes at Emma's enthusiasm. "As long as there's good fishing and cold beer, I'm happy." Marcus was practical that way, grounded in the physical world in a way that balanced out Emma's more ethereal interests. He worked construction, had hands that could fix anything, and possessed an unshakable confidence that I found both comforting and sometimes irritating. Jenna Kim, Emma's roommate and our fourth member, had been the voice of caution. "Are you sure about this? Some of those old trails aren't maintained. What if we get lost?" Jenna taught elementary school and approached everything with the kind of careful planning that came from being responsible for 26 third graders. She was the one who insisted we each carry 2 GPS units and emergency beacons. I should have listened to Jenna. We set out on a Friday morning, driving Marcus's pickup truck up Highway 64 until we reached the obscure Forest Service road Emma had found. The road was barely more than 2 tire tracks cutting through dense undergrowth, and we had to stop twice to move fallen branches. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals. Just the sound of our engine and the crunch of the leaves under our tires. "GPS says we're still on track," Jenna announced, though I noticed her voice carried a note of uncertainty. She was staring at the screen with a slight frown. "Mine's acting weird," Marcus said, tapping his phone. "Shows us in the middle of a lake." Emma laughed from the passenger seat. "Technology fails where the old spirits still walk. That's what my Cherokee contact told me. The electromagnetic properties of certain mineral deposits can interfere with modern navigation." I wish I could say that was the first warning sign, but honestly, Emma's dramatic flair was so familiar that none of us took it seriously. She'd always been drawn to the mystical, the unexplained. It's what made her such a compelling friend and such a brilliant anthropologist. It's also what got her killed. We reached the trailhead around noon. There was no parking area, just a slightly wider spot where the road ended at a wall of ancient hemlocks and oaks. A rusted metal sign, so weathered the text was barely legible, marked the beginning of what Emma insisted was the Cataract Falls Trail. The path immediately plunged into forest so thick it felt like entering a cave. "Beautiful," Emma breathed, shouldering her heavy pack. She'd brought enough equipment to document everything. Cameras, sound recording devices, geological sampling tools. "Look at these trees. Some of them have to be 300 years old." The trail was narrow and overgrown, forcing us to walk single file. Emma led, consulting her maps and a compass that seemed to spin randomly. I followed, then Jenna, with Marcus bringing up the rear. The forest pressed in on all sides, a maze of trunks and low-hanging branches that created a green twilight even at midday. "This doesn't feel right," Jenna said after we'd been walking for an hour. "According to the GPS, we should have reached the first stream crossing by now." "GPS is wrong," Emma called back without turning around. "I know exactly where we are." But I was beginning to doubt that. The path seemed to fork and rejoin randomly, sometimes disappearing entirely into patches of dense undergrowth that we had to push through. Emma navigated these obstacles with strange confidence, as if she'd walked this route before, though I knew she hadn't. "Emma," I called, "maybe we should stop and get our bearings." "Just a little further," she replied. "I can hear the falls." I listened, straining to catch the sound of rushing water, but heard only the wind through leaves and the distant call of a crow. Still, we followed Emma deeper into the forest, trusting her expertise even as my unease grew. We finally stopped to make camp around 4 o'clock, in a small clearing Emma claimed was perfect despite its strange characteristics. The ground was covered in perfectly circular patches where no grass grew, just bare earth that felt cold under our hands. The trees surrounding us were all the same species, massive oaks, and they grew in an almost perfect circle around the clearing. "Weird how uniform everything is," Marcus observed, setting down his pack, "almost like it was planned." Emma was already unpacking her equipment, her excitement palpable. "This is a sacred grove. See how the trees form a natural circle? The Cherokee would have used this for ceremonies. The bare patches are where they built fires." Jenna was studying her GPS again, frowning. "This is really strange. According to this, we're about 15 miles north of where we should be. And look at this. She showed me the screen, where our location appeared as a blank space surrounded by terrain features that didn't match what we could see around us. Mountain minerals, Emma said dismissively. I told you electronics would be unreliable here. But as we set up our tents, I noticed other oddities. The temperature in the clearing was at least 10 degrees colder than it had been on the trail. Our watch hands moved sluggishly, and Jenna's digital watch kept resetting to 12 AC. Most unsettling, the shadows fell wrong, pointing east when the sun was clearly setting in the west. Anyone else notice how quiet it is? Marcus asked as we gathered around our camp stove for dinner. He was right. The normal sounds of evening in the forest, insects, birds settling for the night, the rustle of small animals, were completely absent. It was as if we were the only living things for miles. Emma seemed oblivious to our growing unease. She spent the evening taking photographs and measurements, making notes in a leather-bound journal she'd brought specifically for this trip. This place is exactly what I was hoping to find, she said. Untouched, pristine, still holding the energy of the people who once lived here. We tried to build a campfire after dinner, but the wood wouldn't catch, no matter how much kindling we used or how carefully we arranged it. Even when Marcus got a flame going with lighter fluid, it burned strange, blue-white instead of orange and completely silent. No crackling, no popping, just an eerie, wavering light that cast strange shadows. That's not normal, Jenna whispered, staring at the unnatural flames. Emma was fascinated. Spectral analysis would be amazing. The minerals in the wood, maybe some kind of natural gas seepage. This place just keeps getting better. We went to bed early, partly because of the cold and partly because the weird fire was making everyone nervous. I shared a tent with Emma, while Marcus and Jenna had their own. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I kept hearing sounds that didn't belong. A soft scratching against the tent fabric, footsteps circling our campsite, and what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. "Emma," I whispered, "are you awake?" No response. I reached over to shake her shoulder and found her sleeping bag empty. I sat up, heart hammering. "Emma?" Still no answer. I fumbled for my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The campsite was empty, our strange fire reduced to cold ashes. No sign of Emma anywhere. "Marcus, Jenna," I called, my voice cracking. They emerged from their tent looking groggy and confused. "Where's Emma?" Jenna asked. "I don't know. She was here when I fell asleep, but now—" I gestured helplessly at the empty clearing. We spent the next 2 hours searching, calling Emma's name and sweeping our flashlights through the surrounding forest. The beams seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, illuminating only a few feet in any direction. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our own voices and the crunch of leaves under our feet. "Maybe she went to pee and got turned around," Marcus suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Emma knows these mountains," I said. "She wouldn't wander off in the dark." But there was no trace of her, no footprints in the soft earth around our campsite, no broken branches to show which direction she might have gone. It was as if she had simply vanished. We eventually gave up the search and huddled together in Marcus and Jenna's tent, none of us willing to sleep alone. I dozed fitfully, jolting awake every time the wind moved through the trees or a branch creaked. But toward dawn, I was awakened by a different sound, someone unzipping our tent. "Emma," I whispered. "It's me," came her familiar voice. "Sorry I worried you. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk." Relief flooded through me as Emma crawled into the tent. In the dim pre-dawn light, she looked normal. Same dark hair, same slight build, same worn hiking clothes. But something felt off. "Where did you go?" Jenna asked. "We looked everywhere." "Just to the falls," Emma said. "They're incredible. You have to see them." "The falls?" Marcus sat up. "Emma, we didn't find any falls yesterday. And you were gone for hours." Emma laughed, but it sounded wrong somehow. Too high, lasting a beat too long. time moves differently here. I told you this place was special." "What do you mean, time moves differently?" I asked. "I was only gone for a few minutes," Emma insisted, "just long enough to find the falls and take some pictures." But her camera bag was empty when she opened it. No photos, no equipment that she'd claimed to have used. And when I looked at my watch, it was 6:30 a.m. Emma had been gone for nearly 8 hours. We broke camp quickly that morning. Whatever had happened to Emma, wherever she'd been, I wanted to get back to civilization and figure things out. But as we packed, I noticed more strange details about my friend. Emma's hiking boots were completely clean, despite her claim of walking to waterfalls in the middle of the night. Her clothes showed no sign of moisture, no bramble tears, no dirt. Most disturbing, she moved differently. Too fluid, too quiet, like she was floating just slightly above the ground. "Emma," I said carefully, "are you feeling okay?" She turned to look at me, and for just a moment her face was wrong. Her eyes were too bright, too knowing, and her smile was too wide, stretching her features in a way that human faces weren't meant to stretch. "I feel perfect," she said. "Better than I've ever felt in my life." The expression shifted back to normal so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. We started hiking out but immediately encountered problems. The trail we'd followed yesterday was gone. Not overgrown or hard to find. Completely absent, as if it had never existed. The forest around us looked different too, the trees arranged in patterns that seemed both random and oddly purposeful. "This isn't right," Jenna said, consulting her GPS. "According to this, we're moving deeper into the forest, not toward the road." "The GPS is broken," Emma said with that strange, too bright laugh. "I know exactly where we are." But as the hours passed, it became clear that Emma was leading us further from safety, not toward it. The forest grew denser, darker, more oppressive. The temperature dropped steadily, despite the bright autumn sun that should have been warming us. Our breath began to mist, and frost formed on the leaves around us. "Emma, stop," Marcus finally said, grabbing her arm. "We need to figure out where we are." The moment his hand touched her, Emma's head whipped around with unnatural speed. Her neck twisted too far, nearly 180 degrees, and her eyes had gone completely black. "Don't touch me," she said, and her voice was layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Don't ever touch me." Marcus jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. "What the hell, Emma?" She blinked, and her eyes were normal again. "Sorry, I'm just tired. This place affects people differently." "What place?" Jenna demanded. "Where are we, Emma? What happened to you last night?" "I found what I was looking for," Emma said simply, "and it found me." That's when I noticed the smell. Subtle at first, like compost or mulched leaves, but growing stronger. It was the smell of decay, of things rotting deep in the earth. And it was coming from Emma. "We're leaving," I announced. "Right now. We'll follow our own tracks back to the clearing and figure out the real trail from there." But when we turned around, our footprints were gone. The forest floor showed no sign that we'd ever passed through. Even more disturbing, the path behind us had changed. Where there had been a clear route between the trees, now there was only dense undergrowth and fallen logs. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "Forests don't just rearrange themselves." Emma laughed again, that awful, too long sound. "You're thinking too linearly. This place exists in layers, in dimensions that intersect and overlap. The Cherokee understood that. They knew some places exist outside normal space and time." "Stop talking like that," Jenna snapped. "You're scaring us, Emma, and you're not making sense." "I'm making perfect sense," Emma replied. "You just don't understand yet. But you will." We had no choice but to keep following Emma. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, no landmarks, no sign of human presence. The forest seemed to shift around us as we walked, paths appearing and disappearing, clearings that were there one moment and gone the next. By noon, we were completely lost. Our GPS units had given up entirely, showing only error messages or blank screens. Our watches had stopped working. Even our compasses spun uselessly, unable to find magnetic north. "I need to rest," Jenna said, sitting down heavily on a fallen log. "And I need water. I'm almost out." I checked my own supply and realized we all were. The stream crossings Emma had promised never materialized. The waterfalls she claimed to have found were nowhere to be seen. "There's a spring just ahead," Emma said. "Crystal clear, perfectly safe to drink." But when we reached the spot she indicated, there was no spring. Just more forest, more shadows, more of that smell of decay that followed Emma like a cloud. "You're lying," Marcus said bluntly. "There's no spring, there's no water, and I don't think you know where we are any better than we do." Emma's expression went flat, emotionless. "I know exactly where we are. We're home." "Home?" I stared at her. "Emma, we live in Knoxville. This isn't home for any of us." "It is for me," she said. "It has been since last night, since I went into the hollows and met the others." "What others?" Jenna asked. "The ones who have been waiting. The ones who were here before the Cherokee, before anyone. They've been so lonely, Sarah. Lonely for so long. But now they have me, and soon they'll have all of us." That's when I realized Emma's feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering, just an inch or two above the forest floor, moving with that same unnatural fluidity I'd noticed that morning. "You're not Emma," I whispered. She turned to face me fully, and her features began to shift. Her face elongated, her jaw unhinging like a snake's. Her eyes sank deep into their sockets, becoming black holes that reflected no light. Her fingers stretched into claws, and her skin took on a grayish, corpse-like pallor. "Emma is safe," the thing said in a voice like grinding bones. "Emma is with us now, learning what it means to be eternal. She sent me to bring her friends home." Marcus grabbed a thick branch from the ground, brandishing it like a club. "Stay back. Whatever you are, stay the hell away from us." The creature that wore Emma's face laughed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. "You cannot fight what you cannot understand. This forest belongs to us, has always belonged to us. The Cherokee knew to stay away, to warn their children with stories of the Keklikudla, the Hollow Ones. But you ignored their wisdom. It began to move toward us, not walking but flowing like mist over the ground." Jenna screamed and scrambled backward, tripping over roots and fallen branches. Marcus swung his makeshift weapon, but it passed right through the creature without resistance. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jenna's hand and pulling her to her feet. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear that awful laughter and a sound like dozens of feet following us through the undergrowth. The creature wasn't alone anymore. There were others, moving through the trees around us, herding us like animals. I don't know how long we ran. Time had no meaning in that place. The sun didn't move in the sky. The shadows never shifted. We might have been running for minutes or hours or days. But eventually, we burst into another clearing, and there was Emma. The real Emma. She was hanging upside down from a massive oak tree, wrapped in what looked like spider silk but glowed with a sickly phosphorescent light. Her eyes were open, staring at us with desperate terror. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. "Emma!" Jenna started toward her, but I grabbed her arm. Around the clearing stood dozens of figures, the creatures that lived in the hollows. They wore the faces of people, but the faces were wrong, distorted, like masks that didn't quite fit. Some I recognized from missing persons posters I'd seen over the years. Hikers and campers who had vanished in these mountains and never been found. But they weren't missing. They were here, transformed into something else, something hungry. The creature wearing Emma's stolen face emerged from the tree line behind us. "You've found our collection," it said with false pride. "Each one was once like you, lost, frightened, alone. Now they are part of something greater. Let her go, Marcus demanded, though his voice shook. Oh, we will, the creature replied. Soon she'll be able to walk among you as I do now, to hunt as I do now. But first she must learn to hunger as we hunger. That's when Emma began to scream. The sound that came out of her wasn't human. It was the cry of something being torn apart at the molecular level, dissolved and rebuilt into something else. The silk around her body pulsed with that same sick light, and I could see her skin beginning to change, taking on the same grayish pallor as the creatures around us. "Stop it!" I shouted. "Please, just stop!" "It doesn't hurt for long," the creature said almost gently. "The hunger replaces the pain. The need to feed overwhelms everything else. Soon you'll understand." The other creatures began to close in, and I realized we had only one chance. I still had my emergency flare in my backpack, something Jenna had insisted we all carry. I pulled it out and triggered it, filling the clearing with brilliant red light. The creatures recoiled, shrieking and covering their stolen faces. In that moment of confusion, Marcus threw his weight against the tree where Emma hung. The ancient wood groaned and began to crack. "The light!" I screamed to Jenna. "They hate the light!" Jenna fumbled for her own flare while I held mine high, sweeping it back and forth to keep the creatures at bay. The phosphorescent silk around Emma began to smoke and dissolve in the red glare. Marcus gave the tree another massive shove, and it toppled with a crash that shook the entire forest. Emma fell with it, rolling away from the dissolving silk cocoon. But when she stood up, I could see the transformation had already begun. Her eyes were too bright, her movements too fluid. "Sarah," she whispered, and her voice was layered with harmonics. "Help me." I wanted to. God, how I wanted to reach out and pull my friend to safety. But I could see the hunger already growing in her changed eyes, the way she was looking at us like prey. "I'm sorry," I whispered, backing away. Emma, or what Emma was becoming, let out a wail of despair that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. But the creature wearing her original face only laughed. "You see," it said, "she is already more like us than like you. Soon the transformation will be complete, and she will thank us for freeing her from the weakness of humanity." That's when Jenna's flare ignited, bathing the clearing in a second blast of red light. The creatures scattered like roaches, flowing back into the shadows between the trees. In the brief reprieve, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A narrow gap in the tree line, barely visible but leading upward toward what might be a ridge. "This way," I grabbed Marcus and Jenna, and we ran for the gap, leaving Emma behind. I still wake up screaming sometimes, thinking about that choice, about leaving her there with those things. But I knew, somehow I knew, that the Emma we'd come here with was already gone. What remained was becoming something else, something that would hunt us as soon as the transformation was complete. We climbed through the night, using our remaining flares to light the way and keep the creatures at bay. They followed us, always just out of sight but close enough that we could hear them moving through the trees. Sometimes they called to us in voices we recognized. Emma begging us to come back, our parents asking why we'd abandoned them, our own voices telling us to give up and rest. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. Dawn found us on a rocky outcrop above the tree line, exhausted and dehydrated, but alive. Below us, the forest looked normal, just trees and mountains stretching to the horizon. No sign of the supernatural maze we'd escaped. It took us 2 more days to find our way back to civilization. We told the rangers that Emma had fallen into a ravine and that we couldn't recover her body. They organized search parties, but of course they found nothing. The trail we'd followed into the forest didn't exist on any of their maps. The clearing where we'd camped couldn't be located. The official report listed Emma Chen as missing, presumed dead. Her parents held a memorial service. Her doctoral advisor dedicated her thesis publication to her memory. Life moved on, as it always does, closing over the hole left by her absence. But I know she's not dead. She's something else now, something that wears her face and shares her memories but hungers for things human beings were never meant to hunger for. Sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls where no one speaks, but I can hear breathing that sounds almost like her voice. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of a familiar figure in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight. Marcus and I broke up 6 months later. The strain of what we'd experienced, the guilt of leaving Emma behind, the knowledge that no one would ever believe us. It was too much for our relationship to survive. Jenna moved across the country and changed her name. We don't talk anymore. The silence is easier than trying to pretend we're the same people who went into those mountains. But I still dream about the Cherokee National Forest, about clearings where the shadows fall wrong and time moves in circles, about creatures that wear stolen faces and hunger for the warmth of living flesh, about my best friend, transformed into something alien and terrible, still calling my name from the hollows between the worlds. The Cherokee called that place Envi Asgaya, where spirits dwell. But they were wrong about one thing. The spirits don't just dwell there. They hunt. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can still hear Emma calling my name from somewhere deep in the darkness, promising that if I just come back to the forest, if I just let the creatures find me, I'll never have to be alone again. I'm thinking about it more and more lately, about going back, about going home. The hunger is starting to feel familiar, and sometimes when I look in the mirror my reflection doesn't quite match the movements I'm making. Sometimes I think the transformation didn't end in those mountains. Sometimes I think it followed me home. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee, deep in the Daniel Boone National Forest, where the old logging roads wind like scars through wilderness that has never been fully tamed. I should have known better than to trust Marcus with the directions. My childhood friend had always been the type to improvise, to take shortcuts that inevitably led us into trouble. But it had been 3 years since we'd done a proper camping trip together, and when he suggested we explore some hidden gem trail he'd heard about from a guy at his construction job, I agreed. After the divorce, after losing the house, after watching my life collapse in slow motion over 18 months, I needed to get away from everything. Plus, I had Cooper now, my German Shepherd mix, the one good thing that came out of the settlement, and he deserved better than my cramped apartment. Marcus picked me up in his rusted Chevy at 5 a.m. on a Friday in late October. The truck bed held our gear, 2 tents, sleeping bags, enough food for 3 days, and Marcus's usual over-preparation of beer. Cooper sat between us in the cab, ears perked with the excitement that only dogs feel about car rides to unknown places. "You're gonna love this spot, Jamie," Marcus said, using the nickname from our high school days. His enthusiasm was infectious, even if his directions were written on a grease-stained napkin. "Tom says there's this old trail that connects to Jellicoe Mountain, but it's not on any of the park maps. Real remote. We'll have the whole place to ourselves." The drive took us through Oneida, then south on increasingly narrow roads that seemed to exist in the spaces between official routes. Marcus's napkin led us down a gravel road, then a dirt path barely wide enough for the truck until we reached what could generously be called a parking area. Really, just a widening in the track where the trees pulled back enough for a vehicle. The forest pressed in around us immediately. These weren't the manicured trails of the main park areas, but true Appalachian wilderness. Ancient oaks and maples created a canopy so thick it filtered the morning light into a greenish twilight. The air carried the smell of decomposing leaves and something else, something organic and sour that made Cooper's nose twitch. According to Tom, the trail starts about 50 yards that way. Marcus pointed toward what looked like an impenetrable wall of undergrowth. "There should be blazes once we find it." We shouldered our packs, mine heavier than it should have been because I'd packed like a man trying to carry his troubles into the woods and leave them there. Cooper immediately began investigating every tree and rock with the methodical thoroughness of a creature designed by evolution to detect things that didn't belong. Finding the trail took 20 minutes of pushing through brambles and spider webs. When we finally located it, the path was marked by faded orange blazes on trees. So old they looked more like rust stains than paint. The trail itself was barely 2 feet wide, overgrown and treacherous with roots and loose stones. "This is perfect," Marcus said, grinning. "Haven't seen a single footprint. We're pioneers, buddy." The first hour of hiking felt good. The physical exertion burned away the restless energy I'd been carrying for months. Cooper ranged ahead and behind us, investigating scents and sounds that only he could detect. The trail wound upward through hardwood forest, occasionally opening into small clearings where we could glimpse the layered ridges of the Cumberland Mountains stretching to the horizon. But as the morning wore on, I began to notice things that bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate. The blazes appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes every few trees, sometimes not for 100 yards. Occasionally, I spotted what looked like blazes on trees that led in different directions, as if multiple trails had been marked and then abandoned. The path itself seemed to vary in width and clarity, sometimes opening into what almost resembled an old logging road, sometimes narrowing to barely more than a deer track. "Marcus," I called during one of our water breaks, "are you sure Tom gave you the right directions? This trail feels inconsistent." He was studying his compass, frowning. "That's weird. According to this, we should be heading more northeast, but the trail keeps curving south." He shook the compass and held it at arm's length. "Damn thing might be broken." Cooper had wandered about 20 feet ahead and was standing completely still, staring into the forest with the rigid posture that meant he'd detected something significant. When I called his name, he glanced back at me, then returned his attention to whatever had caught his interest. "What is it, boy?" I walked to where he stood. The trees in that direction looked no different from anywhere else. Oak and maple, thick undergrowth, the typical tangle of Appalachian forest. But there was something about the quality of light that seemed different, as if the shadows fell in patterns that didn't quite match the position of the sun. "Probably just a deer," Marcus said, but Cooper's hackles were raised, and he'd begun that low, barely audible growl that meant he sensed something he didn't like. We continued hiking, but the day's rhythm had been broken. The trail became more difficult to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely for stretches where we had to navigate by compass and instinct. The blazes, when we found them, seemed increasingly faded and inconsistent. Some looked fresh, painted in bright orange that stood out sharply against the bark. Others were so weathered they might have been decades old. By early afternoon, we'd climbed to what felt like a substantial elevation, though the dense canopy made it impossible to get a clear view of our surroundings. The air had grown cooler, and the forest had taken on the hushed quality that comes before weather changes. Marcus had stopped consulting his compass altogether, and I noticed he'd become increasingly quiet, responding to my attempts at conversation with grunts and single-word answers. It was Cooper who found the first real sign that something was wrong. He'd been ranging ahead as usual when he suddenly stopped and began whining, a high, distressed sound I'd never heard from him before. When I caught up, he was standing at the edge of what had once been a campsite. The stone fire ring was overgrown with moss and small saplings, but still clearly artificial. Scattered around it were the remnants of camping gear, a tent pole bent into an impossible angle, strips of nylon fabric caught on thorns, and something that might once have been a backpack, now so decomposed and weather-beaten it looked like part of the forest floor. "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "How long do you think this stuff has been here?" I knelt beside what remained of the backpack, careful not to touch it. The metal frame was corroded, the fabric reduced to colorless rags. Years, maybe decades. But even as I said it, something bothered me. Mixed in with the obviously old debris were items that looked much more recent. A plastic water bottle still retaining some of its color, a section of duct tape that hadn't yet lost its adhesive properties. Cooper was pacing the perimeter of the site, whining continuously. His agitation was starting to affect me. Dogs have senses we've long since abandoned, and Cooper's obvious distress made the hair on my arms stand up. "We should go," I said. Find somewhere else to camp. Marcus was examining the fire ring. Are you kidding? This is perfect. Someone already did the work of clearing a site for us. He kicked at the stones. We just need to clean it up a bit. Marcus, look at this place. Look at Cooper. Something bad happened here. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Jamie. It's just old camping gear. People abandon stuff in the woods all the time. He gestured at the scattered debris. This could have been accumulating for 20 years. But it wasn't just the age of the debris that bothered me. It was the way it was scattered. Not like someone had packed up carelessly and left things behind, but like the campsite had been destroyed suddenly and violently. The tent pole wasn't just bent, it was twisted in a way that suggested tremendous force. And now that I looked more carefully, I could see what might have been claw marks on some of the trees around the clearing. Cooper's whining had escalated to intermittent barks, sharp and urgent. He was focused on something at the far edge of the clearing, near where the trail continued deeper into the forest. What is it, boy? I followed his gaze but saw nothing except trees and shadows. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, though it seemed earlier than it should have been. When I checked my watch, I was surprised to see it was only 3 o'clock. Marcus had begun clearing debris from the fire ring, tossing the accumulated detritus into the woods with more violence than necessary. We're camping here, he said without looking up. I'm not hiking another 3 hours looking for a perfect spot because your dog is spooked. I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was setting in, and the thought of continuing to navigate the increasingly unclear trail in fading light didn't appeal to me either. Instead, I called Cooper to my side and began setting up my tent at the edge of the clearing, as far as possible from whatever was bothering him in the trees. The next hour passed in tense silence. Marcus worked on the fire ring while I assembled my tent and organized my gear. Cooper remained agitated, pacing and occasionally letting out single, sharp barks at something I couldn't see. The forest around us seemed to be settling into evening earlier than it should have, and the temperature was dropping faster than I'd expected for early October. By the time we had camp established and a fire burning in the cleaned-out ring, full darkness had fallen. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trees around our clearing, and I found myself staring into the forest, trying to distinguish between shadows created by the fire and shapes that might be something else entirely. Marcus had grown increasingly quiet as the evening progressed. He sat across the fire from me, drinking beer and staring into the flames with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. When he did speak, his voice had a strange quality, as if he was concentrating on something else while forming words. Tom told me something else about this trail, he said suddenly, something he made me promise not to tell you. I looked up from where I was feeding Cooper pieces of jerky. What kind of something? He said there were rumors. Stories about people who came up here and— Marcus paused, took a long drink from his beer. People who came up here and didn't come back the same. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know. He was being all mysterious about it. Said the locals in Oneida have stories about this part of the forest, about things that live up here. Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow. I thought he was just trying to spook me. Cooper had stopped pacing and was lying beside my chair, but he wasn't relaxed. His ears were constantly moving, tracking sounds I couldn't hear, and every few minutes he would lift his head and stare into the darkness beyond our firelight. Marcus, are you sure Tom gave you the right directions? Because I've been thinking about it all day, and nothing about this trail feels right. The blazes don't match up, the path keeps changing, and now this abandoned campsite— He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something, Jamie. Tom didn't give me directions to this trail. The fire popped, sending sparks into the darkness, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? I found the trail myself, last month when I was scouting deer stands with my uncle. We were about 10 miles south of here, and I saw these blazes leading off into the woods. I followed them for about a mile, just curious, you know, and I found— He stopped, staring into the fire. Found what? A clearing, like this one, but bigger. And there were things there. Structures. Like someone had been living in the woods for a long time. Marcus finished his beer and immediately opened another. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that when I tried to find it again the next week, I couldn't. The blazes were gone. The trail just wasn't there anymore. I stared at him across the fire, trying to process what he was telling me. So, where are we, Marcus? If Tom didn't give you directions and you couldn't find the trail again, then where the hell are we? He shrugged, but the gesture looked forced. I figured it out eventually. Spent some time with topo maps, talked to some old-timers. This area used to be a logging camp back in the 30s and 40s. The blazes we're following aren't trail markers, they're old logging route markers. The problem is, most of these routes were abandoned when the logging ended, and they don't connect to anything anymore. The implications of what he was saying hit me slowly. Marcus, are you telling me we're following a trail that doesn't go anywhere? I'm telling you we're following a trail that goes somewhere it's not supposed to go. Cooper suddenly stood and began growling, a low rumble that I felt in my chest as much as heard. He was facing the darkness beyond the fire's reach, every muscle in his body tense with alertness. Cooper, what is it? I reached for the flashlight in my gear, but Marcus grabbed my wrist. Don't, he said. Don't use the light. Why not? Because if something's out there watching us, the light will tell it exactly where we are. We sat in silence, listening. The fire crackled and hissed, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. But beyond those familiar sounds there was something else, a rhythmic rustling that might have been wind in the leaves, except there was no wind. Cooper's growling intensified, and he took several steps toward the edge of the clearing. Whatever he sensed was getting closer. Cooper, come here, I whispered, but he ignored me. The rustling sound was getting louder, and now I could distinguish individual footsteps. Something large moving through the underbrush, not trying to be quiet. Marcus had gone completely still, his beer forgotten in his hand. Jamie, he whispered, that's not an animal. The footsteps stopped at the edge of our firelight. Cooper was barking now, sharp and aggressive, but he wasn't advancing. He was holding his ground at the perimeter of our camp as if he understood that whatever was out there shouldn't be approached. Then we heard the voice. Help me. It was faint, barely audible over Cooper's barking, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice coming from the darkness beyond the trees. Please, someone help me. Marcus stood up slowly. Hello, he called. Are you hurt? I'm lost, the voice replied. It was closer now, maybe 30 feet from our fire. I've been walking for hours. I saw your light. I grabbed Marcus's arm as he started toward the voice. Wait, I whispered, something's not right. What do you mean? She needs help. But Cooper's reaction was intensifying. He was barking frantically now, moving back and forth along the edge of the clearing as if he was trying to keep something from entering our camp. Please, the voice called again. I'm so cold. The voice was definitely closer, but I still couldn't see anyone. Our fire was bright enough to illuminate at least 20 feet into the tree line, and there was nothing there. Nothing visible anyway. Where are you? Marcus called. I can't see you. I'm right here, the voice said, and now it seemed to be coming from directly in front of us, just beyond the firelight. Why won't you help me? Cooper had stopped barking and was backing toward us, his hackles raised and his body low to the ground. In 30 years of being around dogs, I'd never seen one look so terrified. Marcus, I whispered, get back here, now. But he was already walking toward the voice, his movements stiff and unnatural. It's okay, he said, but he was talking to himself, not to me. She needs help. We have to help her. Marcus, stop. I stood and grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back. When I touched him, his skin was ice cold, and he turned to look at me with eyes that didn't seem entirely focused. Let go of me, Jamie. She needs help. The voice spoke again, and this time it was different. Still recognizably female, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. Why won't you come to me? I'm so lonely out here." I pulled Marcus back to the fire and forced him to sit down. "Listen to me," I said. "Look at Cooper. Look at how he's acting. When has Cooper ever been afraid of a person?" Marcus blinked several times as if he was waking up from a dream. What was I doing?" "You were walking toward the voice." "What voice?" Before I could answer, the woman spoke again, but now her voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. "Please don't leave me alone. It's so dark out here." Marcus grabbed my arm. "Jesus Christ, Jamie. Do you hear that?" Cooper had retreated all the way to our tents and was lying flat against the ground, whimpering. Whatever was out there, it was something that triggered every instinct he had about danger and wrongness. We sat by the fire for the next 3 hours, feeding it constantly to keep the flames high, while the voice called to us from the darkness. Sometimes it sounded like a woman in distress. Sometimes it sounded like a child crying. Occasionally it would mimic our own voices, calling our names in tones that were almost right but not quite. Around midnight, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the calling had been. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy and expectant, as if the forest was holding its breath. "We need to leave," I said. "First light, we pack up and get out of here." Marcus nodded, but his eyes were distant. "Jamie, I need to tell you something else, about why I really brought you up here." I waited. "I've been having dreams, for the past month since I found that first trail. Dreams about this place, about these woods, and in the dreams, I'm not alone. There's someone with me, someone I care about, and something happens to them. Something terrible." "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "In the dreams, I bring someone up here, someone I want to protect, and I lose them. They get taken by something in the woods, and it's my fault because I brought them here." He looked at me across the fire. "I've been having these dreams about you, Jamie, about bringing you up here and losing you." I stared at him, trying to understand what he was telling me. "So, why did you bring me? If you've been having dreams about something bad happening to me here, why did you invite me camping?" "Because the dreams felt more real than anything else in my life. Because I had to know if this place was real, or if I was losing my mind." Marcus's voice was shaking. "And because, in some of the dreams, the only way to save you was to bring you here." Before I could respond, Cooper began barking again, but this time he wasn't facing the forest. He was looking at Marcus. Marcus stood up slowly, and when he turned toward me, his face looked different. His features were the same, but there was something in his expression that I didn't recognize, something that made Cooper bare his teeth and growl. "Marcus," I said carefully, "are you okay?" He smiled, but it was wrong. Too wide, held for too long. "I'm fine, Jamie. Better than I've been in months." Cooper was backing away from him, still growling. I stood up and moved around the fire, putting the flames between Marcus and myself. "Marcus, when did you start having the dreams?" "What dreams?" He was still smiling that wrong smile. "The dreams about this place. You just told me about them." He tilted his head like he was considering the question. "I don't remember telling you about any dreams." I reached for my gear, trying to look casual. "I think maybe we should head back to the truck. It's getting late, and—" Marcus moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, circling the fire in 2 quick steps and grabbing my wrist. His grip was cold and much stronger than it should have been. "But we just got here, Jamie, and she's still out there, waiting for us." I tried to pull away, but his fingers were like iron bands around my wrist. "Marcus, let go of me." "I can't do that. She wants to meet you." Cooper launched himself at Marcus, 60 pounds of muscle and teeth. But Marcus caught him in midair with his free hand, holding the dog by the throat. Cooper struggled and gasped, his legs kicking uselessly. "Let him go." I swung my fist at Marcus's face, connecting hard enough to split his lip. He didn't even flinch. "She's been waiting so long to meet you, Jamie. She's been so lonely." Blood was running from Marcus's lip, but he was still smiling, and his His eyes weren't reflecting the firelight the way they should have been. I grabbed a burning stick from the fire and shoved it toward his face. He released both Cooper and me, stepping back with a hiss that sounded more animal than human. Cooper hit the ground running, disappearing into our tent. I backed toward the tent opening, keeping the burning stick between Marcus and myself. "You're not Marcus," I said. "Of course I'm Marcus." But his voice was different now, with an echo that seemed to come from somewhere else. "I'm your friend. I brought you here because I care about you." "Where is he? Where's the real Marcus?" The thing wearing Marcus's face tilted its head again. "He's right here. He's watching everything I do to you. He's screaming inside, but he can't stop me." I ducked into the tent and zipped it shut, knowing it wouldn't stop whatever was outside but needing the illusion of safety. Cooper was pressed against the far wall of the tent, shaking. I pulled him close and tried to think. The thing outside was walking around the tent, and I could hear Marcus's voice, but it was wrong in every way that mattered. "Jamie, come out. I won't hurt you. She just wants to meet you." I grabbed my gear and found my knife, a 4-inch blade that suddenly felt pathetically small. Through the tent wall, I could see the shadow of the thing moving around our camp, but it was the wrong shape. Too tall, with arms that hung too low. "I know you're scared, Jamie, but there's nowhere to run. These woods go on forever, and we know every trail. We." It had said, "we." I pressed my face to the tent wall and peered out through a gap in the zipper. The thing was standing by the fire, but it wasn't alone anymore. There were others, shapes that might have been human if I didn't look at them too closely. They moved in the wrong ways, with joints that bent in directions that joints shouldn't bend. And among them, barely visible in the firelight, was a woman. She was pale and thin, wearing clothes that might have been white once but were now stained with dirt and something darker. When she turned toward the tent, I saw that her face was wrong, too symmetrical, with features that didn't quite match each other, as if she'd been assembled from parts that had never belonged together. She spoke, and it was the voice we'd been hearing all night. "I've been so lonely, James. So very lonely." The thing wearing Marcus's body gestured toward the tent. "He's in there. He's waiting for you." I grabbed Cooper and my backpack, then used my knife to cut a slit in the back wall of the tent. Cooper seemed to understand immediately and squeezed through the opening. I followed, leaving everything else behind. The forest on the other side of our camp was darker than anything I'd ever experienced. The moon was hidden by clouds, and the canopy was so thick that no starlight reached the ground. I had to navigate by touch, following Cooper as he led us away from the camp. Behind us, I could hear them searching the tent, their voices raised in confusion and anger. Then I heard the thing that had been Marcus call my name, but now it sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. "Jamie, where are you? You can't hide from us." Cooper and I pushed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. I had no idea which direction we were going, but anywhere was better than the camp. The voices behind us were getting louder, and I could hear them crashing through the forest in pursuit. We ran for what felt like hours, though it might have been minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness. Cooper stayed close to my side, occasionally whimpering but never barking. Somehow he seemed to understand that silence was our only protection. Eventually, we reached what felt like a clearing. I stopped to catch my breath and listen for sounds of pursuit, but the forest had gone silent again. No voices, no footsteps, no rustling of leaves. Even the normal night sounds, owls, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush, had stopped. I risked turning on my flashlight for just a moment, shielding the beam with my hand. We were in a small meadow, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by trees that looked wrong somehow. They were too uniform, planted in 2 perfect rows, as if someone had cultivated this spot decades ago and then abandoned it. At the center of the meadow was a structure that made my blood freeze. It was a cabin, or what remained of one. The roof had partially collapsed, and the walls were covered with some kind of growth that looked like moss but moved slightly in the breeze. and covering every visible surface of the cabin were symbols, carved, painted, and burned into the wood. Some looked like letters from alphabets I didn't recognize. Others were more abstract, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Cooper was pressing against my leg, trembling. I turned off the flashlight and stood in the darkness, trying to decide what to do. That's when I heard Marcus's voice again, but now it was coming from inside the cabin. "Jamie, I'm in here. I need help." It sounded like the real Marcus, afraid, hurt, desperate. But I'd already seen what the things in these woods could do with voices. "Please, Jamie. Something happened to me. I can't move." Cooper's trembling intensified and he began backing away from the cabin. I trusted his instincts more than my own confusion and hope. "I know you're out there," the voice continued. "I can hear you breathing. Please, just help me get out of here." I started to back away from the clearing, but stopped when I heard another voice from the cabin. A woman's voice, weak and terrified. "Is someone there? Please, help us." The voice was different from the one we'd heard at the camp. This one sounded genuinely human, genuinely afraid. And if there was even a chance that someone else was trapped in there, against every instinct I had, against Cooper's obvious terror, I approached the cabin. The door was hanging open, creaking slightly as it moved in the breeze. I turned on my flashlight and shined it through the doorway. The interior of the cabin was worse than the exterior. The floor was covered with bones. Animal bones, I told myself, though some of them looked disturbingly large. And scattered among the bones were personal items, backpacks, hiking boots, camping gear, all in various stages of decay. In the center of the room, sitting against the far wall, was Marcus. He looked exactly like he should have looked, except for his eyes. His eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright, and they didn't track the movement of my flashlight beam. "Jamie," he said, and his voice was perfectly normal. "Thank God you found me. Something attacked our camp. I managed to get away, but I think my leg is broken." I played the flashlight beam down to his legs. One of them was bent at an impossible angle with bone protruding through the skin. But there was no blood, and Marcus wasn't showing any signs of pain. "Marcus," I said carefully, "what attacked us?" "I don't know. Some kind of animal. It looked like—" He paused as if trying to remember. "It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was wearing people-like clothes." Cooper was whimpering behind me, but I stepped into the cabin. Something about Marcus's description rang true in a way that cut through my terror. "Where's the woman?" I asked. "I heard a woman's voice." Marcus looked confused. "What woman?" I shined my light around the cabin, looking for anyone else. In the corner, partially hidden by debris, I found her. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and hiking clothes that looked expensive. She was conscious and looking at me with eyes that were definitely human. "Please," she whispered, "get me out of here." I approached her carefully. She was sitting against the wall, and when I got closer I could see why she couldn't move. Her legs were wrapped in something that looked like roots or vines, but they were moving slightly, tightening and loosening like they were alive. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "I don't know. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't work right in this place." She looked at Marcus, then back at me. "He's not your friend anymore. Whatever brought us here, it's wearing his face now." I turned back to Marcus, and he was smiling that same wrong smile I'd seen at the camp. "She's lying, Jamie. She's one of them. She's trying to trick you into leaving me here." Cooper had followed me into the cabin and was now growling at Marcus. But he was also growling at the woman. His reaction suggested that neither of them was entirely human. "I don't know what to believe," I said, backing toward the door. "But I'm not staying here to find out." That's when the woman's face changed. The features shifted and rearranged themselves until she looked exactly like my ex-wife Sarah. "James," she said, and it was Sarah's voice, perfect in every detail. "Please don't leave me here. I know I hurt you, but I love you. I've always loved you." The emotional impact was like a physical blow. For a moment I was paralyzed by the sight of Sarah's face, by the sound of her voice saying the words I'd wanted to hear for 2 years. But Cooper was barking frantically now, and the sound broke through my emotional paralysis. Whatever these things were, they fed on human connection, on love and loyalty and the bonds that made us human. I ran for the door, Cooper at my side. Behind me I could hear both Marcus and the thing wearing Sarah's face calling my name, but I didn't look back. We burst out of the cabin and ran across the clearing, plunging back into the forest. This time, I didn't try to be quiet or careful. I just ran, branches whipping across my face, roots trying to trip me, the darkness so complete it felt solid. Cooper stayed with me, occasionally barking directions when I started to veer too far off course. He seemed to have a better sense of direction than I did, or maybe he could smell something that would lead us back to safety. We ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I could see the faintest hint of light through the trees. Dawn was coming, and somehow we'd been running toward it. Cooper was exhausted too, his tongue hanging out as he panted, but his ears were still alert. When I listened carefully, I could hear something in the distance, the sound of traffic. We pushed through the last section of forest and emerged onto a road, not the dirt track we'd driven in on, but an actual paved road with yellow lines and reflective markers. About a mile to our left, I could see the lights of a gas station. I picked up Cooper, all 60 pounds of him, and started walking toward the lights. He was too tired to protest, and I needed the comfort of holding something real and warm and unquestionably alive. The gas station was part of a truck stop, busy with early morning traffic. The clerk behind the counter looked at me with concern as I stumbled through the door, carrying my exhausted dog and probably looking like I'd been attacked by the forest itself. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at how inadequate that description was. "I need to call the police. My friend is missing in the woods." The clerk let me use the phone behind the counter. I called 911 and tried to explain what had happened, but how do you tell someone that your friend has been replaced by something that wears faces like masks? I stuck to the basics: camping trip, friend missing, need search and rescue. The sheriff's deputy, who arrived an hour later, was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who listened to my story without judgment. He arranged for search teams to look for Marcus, though I couldn't give them accurate directions to where we'd been camping. "The thing is," the deputy said as we drove the back roads looking for Marcus's truck, "we get reports like this more than you'd think. People go camping in the deep woods, something weird happens, someone goes missing. Usually they turn up in a few days with a story about getting lost and confused." "What about the people who don't turn up?" He was quiet for a moment. "There are parts of these mountains that have been uninhabited for longer than most folks realize. Old logging camps, abandoned settlements, places where the Cherokee used to leave their dead. Some of the old-timers say there are things in those places that remember when the world was different. We never found Marcus's truck. We never found Marcus. The search teams combed the area where I thought we'd been camping, but they found no trace of our campsite, no abandoned trails, no evidence that we'd ever been there. I stayed in a motel in Oneida for 3 days, helping with the search, but eventually I had to accept that whatever had happened to Marcus, it wasn't something that could be fixed by search and rescue teams. Before I left Tennessee, I visited the local library and did some research. The area where we'd been camping had a history that went back centuries. The Cherokee had considered it cursed ground, a place where the dead didn't rest properly. Later, when white settlers arrived, there were reports of entire families disappearing without a trace. The logging camps that operated there in the early 1900s had unusually high rates of accidents and disappearances, until the companies finally abandoned the area as unprofitable. Most recently, there had been a series of disappearances in the 1980s. Hikers and campers who went into the deep woods and were never seen again. The official explanation was that people had gotten lost and died of exposure, but the local newspaper had interviewed some of the searchers, and their stories were consistent. They had found campsites that looked like they'd been abandoned suddenly and violently, but no bodies, no trails leading away, No indication of where the missing people had gone. The last thing I found was a mention in a book about Appalachian folklore. It described entities called the Hollow Ones, spirits that inhabited abandoned places and fed on human loneliness and connection. According to the legend, they could take the form of anyone you trusted, anyone you loved, and they would use that connection to draw you deeper into their territory until you became one of them. I drove home to Ohio with Cooper sleeping in the passenger seat, and I tried to convince myself that everything I'd experienced could be explained by stress, exhaustion, and the power of suggestion. For a while, I almost succeeded, but 3 months later, I got a phone call from Marcus's number. "Jamie," his voice said when I answered, "I've been trying to reach you. I'm sorry I disappeared like that. I got lost in the woods and it took me a while to find my way back to civilization." I hung up immediately and blocked the number, but he called again from different numbers. Always the same story. He'd been lost. He was sorry. He wanted to see me. The last call came 2 weeks ago. When I answered, it wasn't Marcus's voice. It was mine. "James," the voice said, and it was perfect, identical to my own voice in every way. "I know where you live now. I know about your job, your apartment, your routines, and I know about Cooper." I looked across the room at Cooper, who was lying by the window but was now standing with his hackles raised, staring at the phone in my hand. "I've been so lonely since you left," my own voice continued. "But don't worry. I'm coming to visit soon. We have so much to talk about." The line went dead, and I haven't answered my phone since. I'm writing this story because I need someone to know what happened, in case I disappear too. I've been looking into moving, maybe to another state, but I don't think distance matters to these things. They found my phone number. They know where I live. Cooper hasn't been the same since we got back. He doesn't sleep well, and he spends hours staring out the window as if he's watching for something. Sometimes, late at night, I catch him staring at me with an expression I can't read, and I wonder if the thing that called me was right. I wonder if I brought something back with me from those woods. Last night, I woke up to find my apartment door standing open. I was sure I'd locked it before going to bed, but there it was, open to the dark hallway beyond. Cooper was standing in the doorway, perfectly still, staring out into the darkness. When I called his name, he turned to look at me, and for just a moment, his eyes didn't reflect the light properly. I'm leaving this story with my neighbor, with instructions to give it to the police if I disappear. I'm also leaving Cooper with her because whatever happens to me, he doesn't deserve to be dragged back into the darkness. If you're reading this because I vanished, please remember that some places are meant to stay empty, some trails are meant to remain untraveled, and some voices calling for help in the darkness are not meant to be answered. The mountains of Tennessee are beautiful, but they hold secrets that are older and darker than most people realize. If you go camping there, stay on the marked trails. Don't follow blazes that seem too old or too new. Don't trust voices calling from the darkness, no matter how familiar they sound. And if someone you trust starts acting wrong, if their smile becomes too wide or their eyes don't reflect light properly, don't give them the benefit of the doubt. Run. And whatever you do, don't look back. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 28 years old. This happened in October of last year, deep in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, on a trail that doesn't appear on any official map anymore. I should have known something was wrong when David suggested we take the old hunter's route instead of sticking to the marked Appalachian Trail section we'd planned. But David Jones had been my best friend since college, and Sarah Rodriguez had been dating him for 3 years, long enough that the three of us had become an inseparable unit for these annual camping trips. I trusted them both with my life. I wish I hadn't. The October air was crisp as we loaded our packs at the Ocoee River parking area, the kind of perfect fall morning that makes you forget winter is coming. Sarah laughed at something David said while adjusting her hiking boots, her breath visible in small puffs. She'd been stressed about her new job at the law firm, working 60-hour weeks, and this trip was supposed to help her decompress. David had promised her something special, a hidden waterfall he'd heard about from some old-timer at the gear shop in Tellico Plains. "It's called Whispering Falls," David explained as we shouldered our packs. "Supposed to be about 12 miles in, completely pristine. This guy said it's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen." I checked my GPS one last time before we headed out. The coordinates David had given me seemed to point toward a blank area on the topographic map, somewhere between the marked trails in the most remote section of the Cherokee. My Garmin showed only green. No trails, no landmarks, just wilderness. "You sure about these coordinates?" I asked. David grinned, that easy smile that had gotten us out of trouble more times than I could count. "Trust me, Mike. When have I ever steered you wrong?" The first few hours were perfect. We followed an actual trail for about 5 miles, climbing steadily through maple and oak trees painted in brilliant reds and golds. Sarah's mood lifted with each mile, and she started taking pictures of everything: fungi growing on fallen logs, spider webs jeweled with dew, the way the morning light filtered through the canopy. But when David led us off the marked trail and onto what he claimed was the hunter's route, everything changed. The path, if you could call it that, was barely visible, just a faint depression in the leaf litter that wound between massive rhododendron thickets. The forest here felt different. Older. The trees were enormous, their trunks thick enough that it would take 4 people holding hands to circle them. Spanish moss hung like gray shrouds from the branches, and the air carried a musty smell, like wet earth and decay. "How did that old guy even know about this place?" Sarah asked, swatting away a spiderweb that stretched across our path. "He used to hunt these mountains when he was young," David replied, "before they restricted access to most areas. Said his grandfather showed him the way when he was just a kid." I checked my GPS again. The screen showed our location as a blue dot surrounded by complete blankness. No topographic details, no trail markers, no elevation lines, just a blue dot floating in digital void. "GPS is acting weird," I said, showing them the screen. David barely glanced at it. "Electronics always get screwy in these old-growth areas. Too much moisture in the air or something. We'll be fine." But as we continued deeper into the forest, I noticed other things. The bird sounds that had accompanied us all morning gradually faded away. The wind, which had been rustling the leaves consistently, died to an eerie stillness. And the path, what little there was of it, seemed to be leading us downward at an increasingly steep angle, as if we were descending into the earth itself. By early afternoon, we found ourselves in a narrow valley I couldn't locate on any of my maps. The sides rose steeply on both directions, covered in dense vegetation that blocked most of the sunlight. A thin stream ran down the center, its water so clear it seemed almost artificial. "This has to be it," David said, consulting a compass that spun lazily without settling on any direction. "The waterfall should be just ahead." Sarah had grown quiet over the last hour. She kept looking over her shoulder, and I noticed her hand straying to the bear spray clipped to her belt. "Something feels wrong about this place," she said finally. I felt it too, a weight in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. The silence was complete now, broken only by our breathing and the soft trickle of the stream. No insects, no rustling leaves. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was absorbing sound. "Let's find a spot to set up camp," I suggested. "We can look for the waterfall in the morning." David nodded, though I could see frustration in his eyes. We'd been hiking for 8 hours, and there was no sign of any waterfall. We found a small clearing about 50 yards from the stream, relatively flat and clear of the massive rhododendrons that choked most of the valley floor. As we set up our tents, I noticed that the ground felt spongy underfoot, as if we were walking on a thick layer of decomposing organic matter. The sun was setting earlier than it should have been. According to my watch, it was only 5:30 p.m., but the light filtering down through the canopy had already taken on the orange tint of late evening. Above us, the trees seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a natural ceiling that blocked out most of the sky. Sarah's tent went up normally, but David and I both struggled with ours. My stakes kept pulling out of the soft ground, and the guy lines wouldn't hold tension properly. David's tent pole broke when he tried to set it up, snapping cleanly in half with a sound like a gunshot that echoed strangely in the quiet valley. "Guess I'm sleeping under the stars," David said with forced cheer, but I could see him eyeing the sky nervously. We managed to get a fire going, though it took longer than usual. The wood was damp despite the clear weather, and the flames kept guttering out for no apparent reason. When we finally got it lit, the fire burned with an odd blue tinge that none of us mentioned but all of us noticed. Dinner was a subdued affair. The dehydrated pasta tasted like cardboard, and the water from the stream, despite being crystal clear, left a metallic aftertaste that made me slightly nauseous. Sarah barely ate anything. "I keep feeling like we're being watched," she said, staring into the darkening forest around us. David laughed, but it sounded hollow. "It's just being in a new place. Your brain isn't used to the sounds and smells." "What sounds?" Sarah asked. "That's the problem. There are no sounds." She was right. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. No owls, no insects, no wind in the leaves. Just the faint crackling of our strange blue fire and the distant trickle of the stream. As full darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. I put on my winter jacket and was still shivering. The cold seemed to seep up from the ground itself, and no matter how close I sat to the fire, I couldn't get warm. "I'm going to get some more wood," David announced, standing up. "Don't go far," I said. "This place is confusing enough in daylight." David nodded and walked toward the tree line, his headlamp beam bobbing among the rhododendrons. We watched the light move away from camp until it disappeared behind the thick vegetation. Sarah and I sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. The fire continued to burn with that unnatural blue color, and I found myself staring into the flames, watching patterns that seemed almost like faces forming and dissolving in the tongues of light. "Mike," Sarah said quietly, "how long has he been gone?" I checked my watch. "Maybe 10 minutes." But it felt longer. Much longer. In the absolute silence of the valley, 10 minutes stretched like hours. "David," Sarah called out. Her voice seemed to die just a few feet from where we sat, swallowed by the darkness. No response. I grabbed my own headlamp and stood up. "I'll go find him. He probably just got turned around." But as I walked toward where I'd seen David's light disappear, I realized I couldn't tell which direction he'd actually gone. In the darkness, every gap between the rhododendrons looked the same. The beam of my headlamp seemed to penetrate only a few feet before being absorbed by the black spaces between the trees. "David," I called louder this time. The sound of my voice came back wrong, distorted, as if it had bounced off surfaces that shouldn't exist in an open forest. And underneath the echo, I heard something else, a faint rustling like something large moving through the underbrush. I followed the sound, pushing through the rhododendron thickets. The branches seemed to grab at my clothes, and more than once I had to use my hands to force my way through gaps that looked wider than they actually were. Behind me, the light from our campfire grew dimmer and dimmer, until it was just a blue glow filtered through the vegetation. "David, where the hell are you?" A twig snapped somewhere to my left. I turned toward the sound, my headlamp beam sweeping across moss-covered tree trunks and hanging vines. For just a moment, I thought I saw something pale moving behind a large oak tree, but when I focused my light on the spot, there was nothing there. The silence pressed against my eardrums like deep water. Even my own breathing seemed unnaturally loud. I was about to call out again when I heard it, a low whistle, almost musical, coming from somewhere ahead of me. It was David's signal, the one we'd used since college when we got separated on hikes. I followed the sound deeper into the forest, relieved. But as I walked, something nagged at me. The whistle came again, closer now, but there was something off about it. The pitch was right, but the rhythm was wrong. Too slow, with pauses that stretched just a beat too long. I found David standing in a small clearing about 100 yards from camp, his back to me. He was perfectly still, his headlamp off, staring at something I couldn't see. "David, you okay, man?" He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. I walked around to face him, and my blood went cold. David's eyes were open, but they weren't looking at anything. They stared straight ahead with the flat, empty expression of a sleepwalker. His mouth hung slightly open, and I could see his breath misting in the cold air, but he wasn't blinking. Wasn't moving at all except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. "David," I said, louder this time, and reached out to shake his shoulder. The moment I touched him, he collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. I barely caught him before he hit the ground, and his body was limp and unnaturally cold, as if all the warmth had drained out of him. But he was breathing. His pulse was strong and regular. He just seemed to be in some kind of catatonic state. I managed to get him back to camp, half carrying and half dragging him through the rhododendrons. Sarah helped me get him into his sleeping bag by the fire, and we spent the next hour trying to wake him up. We checked his pupils with a flashlight, felt for head injuries, even slapped him a few times. Nothing worked. He just lay there, breathing steadily, his eyes staring at nothing. "We need to get him to a hospital," Sarah said, her voice tight with panic. "With what?" I asked. "We're at least 12 miles from the nearest road, and I have no idea which direction. My GPS is still showing nothing, and the compass isn't working." Sarah pulled out her phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising given our location, but the screen itself was acting strangely. The time display kept changing, sometimes showing 9:47 p.m., sometimes 11:23 p.m., sometimes 3:15 a.m. The battery indicator fluctuated between full charge and completely dead. "We'll have to wait until morning," I said. "Try to retrace our steps." Sarah nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She kept looking at David's motionless form and then out into the darkness beyond our fire. We took turns staying awake to watch David, but also because neither of us felt safe sleeping. The fire continued to burn that unnatural blue color, and we had to keep feeding it wood to prevent it from going out completely. Every time the flames died down, the darkness seemed to press closer, and we could hear things moving in the forest around us. Around what my watch claimed was 2 a.m., I was on watch duty when I heard Sarah's voice calling my name from the forest. "Mike! Mike! Help me!" I looked over at Sarah's tent. The zipper was closed, and I could see her sleeping bag silhouette through the thin fabric. She was obviously inside, asleep. But the voice came again, more urgent this time. "Mike, please, something's wrong with David." I grabbed my headlamp and unzipped Sarah's tent. She was fast asleep, curled up in her sleeping bag, breathing peacefully. The voice in the forest called again, and this time I was sure. It was Sarah's voice, perfect in every detail, but she was right here in front of me. I shook her awake. "Sarah, wake up." Her eyes opened, confused and groggy. "What? What's wrong? Did you just call for me?" "No, I was asleep." "Why?" From the darkness beyond our camp, Sarah's voice called out again. "Mike, where are you? I can't find the camp." Sarah's eyes went wide. She looked from me to the darkness where her own voice was coming from, and I watched the color drain from her face. "That's not me," she whispered. We sat frozen, listening. The voice continued to call, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always using Sarah's exact tone and inflection. It knew things only Sarah would know. References to conversations we'd had earlier. Private jokes between the three of us. "Mike, remember that time in Colorado when David got us lost?" the voice said, now seeming to come from directly behind David's sleeping form. "You said you'd never trust his navigation again. You were right." Sarah was shaking now. "I never told anyone about that conversation," she whispered. "That was just between you and me." The voice laughed, Sarah's laugh, but wrong somehow, like an audio recording played back at slightly the wrong speed. We huddled together by the fire until dawn, listening to the thing in the darkness call to us with Sarah's voice. Sometimes it begged for help. Sometimes it cried. Once it sang a lullaby that Sarah's mother used to sing to her, word for word, in a perfect imitation of her childhood voice. Dawn came abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment we were sitting in complete darkness, and the next, pale gray light was filtering down through the canopy. The temperature rose quickly, and the oppressive silence was broken by the return of normal forest sounds, birds calling to each other, insects buzzing, wind rustling the leaves. David sat up like he was waking from a normal sleep. "Morning already?" he said, stretching. I slept like the dead. Sarah and I stared at him. He looked completely normal, alert, refreshed, smiling. No sign of the catatonic state he'd been in for hours. "David," I said carefully, "do you remember what happened last night?" He looked confused. "What do you mean? We set up camp, had dinner, went to sleep. What's with the long faces?" I told him about finding him in the clearing, about his catatonic state, about the voice calling from the forest. David listened with growing concern, but it was clear he had no memory of any of it. "That's really weird," he said. "I feel fine now, though. Maybe I had some kind of reaction to something I ate?" Sarah hadn't spoken since David woke up. She was staring at him with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, suspicion, something else. "We need to leave," she said suddenly. "Right now." David nodded. "Absolutely. This place is giving me the creeps in daylight. I can't imagine what it was like last night." But as we packed up our gear, things went wrong. Sarah's backpack, which she'd left carefully organized the night before, was in complete disarray. Her clothes were scattered throughout the pack, and her sleeping bag was soaking wet despite the fact that it had been inside her tent all night. My own pack was missing several essential items: my water purification tablets, my emergency whistle, and, most disturbing of all, my map and compass. I distinctly remembered putting them in the top pocket before going to sleep. David's pack was fine. Everything exactly where it should be. "Someone was in our camp last night," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "Who?" David asked. "We're in the middle of nowhere." But I was thinking about the voice that had called to us, how it had known intimate details about our friendship, about conversations between Sarah and me that David hadn't been part of. We tried to retrace our route from the day before, but everything looked different in daylight. The path we'd followed down into the valley seemed to have vanished completely. We spent hours searching for it, climbing up and down the steep sides of the valley, but found nothing that resembled the hunter's route David had led us down. "This doesn't make sense," David said, consulting his compass. The needle spun wildly before settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be north according to the sun's position. "We came down into this valley. The path has to be here somewhere." But it wasn't. By mid-afternoon, we were exhausted and no closer to finding our way out. The stream that ran through the valley seemed to flow in an impossible direction, sometimes uphill, and when I tried to follow it to its source, it simply disappeared into a tangle of rocks and moss after about a quarter mile. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly. "Completely lost." David was studying his compass again, turning it in different directions, but the needle continued to behave erratically. "Let's try going up one of the ridges," he suggested. "Get above the tree line and see if we can spot any landmarks." We chose the eastern ridge, which looked like the least steep option. But as we climbed, the forest seemed to grow denser rather than thinner. The trees pressed closer together, and thick vines hung down from the canopy like a curtain. We had to use our hands to push through the vegetation, and progress was slow and exhausting. After 2 hours of climbing, we should have reached the ridge top, but we seemed to be in exactly the same type of dense forest we'd started in. My altimeter showed we'd gained elevation, but the landscape around us hadn't changed at all. "This is impossible," I said, checking the device again. "We should be above the tree line by now." Sarah was looking around with growing panic in her eyes. "These aren't the same trees," she said. "Look at them." She was right. The trees here were different. Older, more twisted, covered in strange fungal growths that formed spiral patterns on their bark. The air smelled different too. heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something organic and wrong. "We need to go back," Sarah said. But when we turned around to descend, we couldn't find the way we'd come up. The forest behind us looked exactly like the forest in every other direction, dense, dark, and unwelcoming. David was acting strangely. While Sarah and I grew more panicked, he seemed almost calm, as if he knew something we didn't. "Let's just keep going," he said. "We'll find a way out." "A way out? To where?" Sarah snapped. "We don't even know where we are." David smiled, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and alien. "Trust me," he said. But I was beginning to think that trusting David was the last thing we should do. We made camp again that night in another small clearing, this one higher up on the ridge. The trees here were so tall and dense that we could barely see the sky, even in the small open space. The fire was even harder to light than the night before, and it burned with the same unnatural blue color. David volunteered to gather firewood again, and despite my objections, he disappeared into the forest. This time, Sarah and I stuck together. "There's something wrong with him," Sarah whispered when we were alone. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. He leads us to this place that doesn't exist on any map. He gets lost in the forest and comes back with no memory of what happened. His pack is the only one that wasn't messed with, and now he's acting like getting lost doesn't bother him at all." I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't. David was my best friend, but his behavior since last night had been increasingly odd. There was something different about him. Subtle changes in the way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he looked at us. "You think something happened to him out there?" I asked. "I think something took him," Sarah said, "and whatever came back isn't David." The words sent a chill down my spine, but before I could respond, we heard David returning. He emerged from the tree line carrying an armload of wood, smiling that easy smile that had always been so reassuring but now seemed somehow predatory. "Miss me?" he asked. That night, Sarah and I took turns staying awake again, but this time we were watching David as much as we were watching the forest. He slept peacefully, breathing regularly, but twice I caught him with his eyes open, staring at nothing, just like when I'd found him in the clearing. Around midnight, Sarah shook me awake. "Listen," she whispered. From somewhere in the forest, I could hear singing. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing what sounded like an old hymn. The melody was beautiful but somehow wrong, as if the singer didn't quite understand how human voices were supposed to work. David sat up abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he asked, but there was something eager in his voice, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Don't," Sarah said when David started to stand up. "Don't go out there." But David was already reaching for his headlamp. "Someone might need help." "David, no one else should be out here. We're in the middle of nowhere." David paused, and for a moment his face went completely blank. Then that strange smile returned. "You're right," he said. "How silly of me." But he didn't lie back down. He sat there for the rest of the night, staring into the forest, occasionally humming along with the voice that continued to sing until dawn. The third day was when everything fell apart. We woke to find our supplies had been tampered with again. Sarah's water bottles were empty, though she'd filled them the night before. My trail mix was gone, replaced with what looked like the same nuts and dried fruit but tasted like ash and decay. David's food was untouched. More disturbing was what we found around our campsite. Symbols carved into the trees. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings that formed intricate patterns. They looked fresh, the wood inside the cuts still pale and weeping sap. "These weren't here yesterday," I said, running my finger along one of the deeper carvings. David examined them with interest. "Maybe they're old trail markers, from when this area was first logged." But the cuts were fresh, I was sure of it. We spent the morning trying to find our way out of the valley, but every path we took seemed to lead us back to the same place. We'd walk for hours in what felt like a straight line, only to emerge back at our campsite. The stream that had been flowing north the day before was now flowing south. My GPS showed our location as a dot floating in a completely blank area with no reference points or elevation data. "We're going in circles," Sarah said after our third attempt to climb out of the valley failed. "No," David said thoughtfully. "I don't think we're going in circles. I think the valley is moving around us." The casual way he said it, as if he were commenting on the weather, made my skin crawl. By afternoon, Sarah was becoming increasingly agitated. She kept looking over her shoulder, jumping at every sound, and I noticed she'd started walking with her bear spray in her hand. "Something's been following us," she said when I asked her about it. I hadn't noticed anything, but then again, I'd been focused on trying to navigate our way out. I started paying more attention to our surroundings, and after about an hour, I heard it too. Footsteps in the forest parallel to our path, always just out of sight. "David," I called ahead. "Stop for a minute." We all stood still and listened. The footsteps continued for a few more seconds before stopping abruptly. "Probably just an animal," David said, but he was smiling again, that cold, alien smile. We made camp for the third night in yet another clearing that looked exactly like the previous two. As we set up our tents, I realized I couldn't remember which direction we'd come from, or which direction led back to where we'd started. Every direction looked the same, dense forest stretching away into darkness. The fire wouldn't light at all this time. We tried everything. Different kindling, dry leaves, even some of David's emergency fire starter, but the wood would smoke and smolder without ever catching flame. "Forget it," Sarah said. "We'll be cold, but we'll survive." But David kept trying, growing more frustrated with each failed attempt. Finally, he pulled out his lighter and held the flame directly against a piece of bark. The bark caught fire immediately, burning with a bright orange flame that looked normal and reassuring. "See?" David said. "Just had to find the right technique." But as soon as he let go of the bark, the flames turned blue again, and the fire settled into that same unnatural color we'd seen the previous nights. Sarah wouldn't eat dinner. She sat at the edge of our camp, staring out into the forest, gripping her bear spray like a lifeline. "Something's out there," she whispered when I brought her a cup of hot tea. "I can feel it watching us." I followed her gaze but saw only darkness between the trees. But she was right. There was a presence in the forest, something intelligent and patient and hungry. "We need to stay together tonight," I said. "No one goes anywhere alone." David nodded agreeably, but I noticed he kept glancing toward the tree line with that same eager expression he'd had when he heard the singing the night before. As full darkness fell, we heard them, voices calling from the forest. Not just one this time, but several. My mother's voice, calling my name the way she had when I was a child and had gotten lost in the department store. Sarah's sister, who had died in a car accident 5 years ago, asking Sarah to come find her. David's ex-girlfriend Emma, who'd broken up with him because she said he was becoming someone she didn't recognize. The voices knew things they shouldn't know. They called us by childhood nicknames, referenced private conversations, spoke in perfect imitations of people we'd lost. Sarah was crying now, openly sobbing as her dead sister's voice begged her to come into the forest. "It's not real," I kept telling her. "It's not real." But David stood up. "I'm going to go find Emma," he announced. "No." Sarah grabbed his arm. "David, that's not Emma. Emma's dead." David looked down at her with an expression of mild confusion. "Emma's not dead. She's right out there, calling for me. Can't you hear her?" "David, Emma died in that car accident 3 years ago. You went to her funeral. We all did." For a moment, David's face went completely blank, as if he was a computer trying to process information that didn't make sense. Then he smiled. "You're confused," he said gently. "Emma and I just broke up last month. She's been camping nearby and now she's lost. I need to help her." He started walking toward the tree line and Sarah tackled him. They struggled on the ground while Emma's voice continued to call from the darkness, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes seductive. Sarah was stronger than she looked, but David was bigger and he managed to throw her off. I jumped on him, and the three of us rolled around in the dirt beside our blue fire. David fought with inhuman strength, his hands cold as ice, his breath misting in the air despite his exertion. "Let me go," he said, and his voice was calm even as he struggled against us. "I need to find Emma. She's waiting for me." "David, listen to me," I said, grabbing his face and forcing him to look at me. "Emma is dead. We went to her funeral. You cried for 3 hours at the graveside." David's eyes focused on mine, and for just a moment I saw my friend there. Confused, scared, but definitely David. "Mike," he whispered, "what's happening to me?" But then his eyes went blank again, and he smiled that terrible smile. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said. "Now let me go find Emma." He threw us off with surprising ease and walked into the forest. We could hear him crashing through the underbrush calling Emma's name, while her voice led him deeper and deeper into the darkness. Sarah and I sat by the blue fire, listening to the sounds of David's pursuit fade into the distance. The other voices continued to call: my mother, Sarah's sister, others I didn't recognize but which seemed to know us intimately. "We have to leave him," Sarah said finally. "We can't just abandon him. That's not David anymore. Whatever took him in the clearing that first night, it's been wearing him like a mask ever since." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew she was right. The David who had returned from the forest that first night had been wrong, in subtle ways that became more obvious as time went on. Different speech patterns, different mannerisms, different responses to emotional triggers. "At first light," I said. "We leave at first light." But first light never came. We sat by that blue fire for what felt like hours, waiting for dawn, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. My watch showed 5:30 a.m., then 7:45 a.m., then 3:22 a.m., the display changing randomly as if time itself had become fluid. The voices in the forest grew closer and more insistent. Sarah's sister began describing their childhood bedroom in perfect detail, begging Sarah to come play their old games. My mother's voice told me she was proud of me, that she missed me, that she just wanted to give me one more hug. I wanted to go to them. The rational part of my brain knew it was a trap, but the emotional pull was overwhelming. These were people I'd lost, people I'd grieved for, offering me one more chance to see them, to talk to them, to tell them all the things I'd never gotten to say. Sarah grabbed my hand as I started to stand. "Don't," she whispered. "That's how it got David." We held on to each other as the voices circled our camp, sometimes close enough that we could see shapes moving between the trees, shadows that looked almost human but moved in ways that hurt to watch. Then we heard David's voice. "Mike! Sarah! I found Emma. She's hurt. I need help." The voice was coming from directly behind us. We turned to see David emerging from the forest, supporting someone who looked exactly like Emma. Same blonde hair, same small frame, same face I remembered from the photographs David had shown us years ago. But Emma's eyes were black holes, and when she smiled, her teeth were too sharp and too numerous to fit in a human mouth. "Help me get her to the fire," David said, and his voice was David's voice, but his eyes were the same black holes as Emma's. Sarah screamed. The thing wearing Emma's face tilted its head at the sound, like a bird listening to a new song. The thing wearing David's face continued to smile. "She's hurt," David Thing said again. "We need to help her." They started walking toward us, moving in perfect synchronization, their feet not quite touching the ground. Sarah ran. I followed her, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, we could hear them following, not running, just walking with that same steady, synchronized pace, but somehow keeping up with our panicked flight. We ran through the dark forest for what felt like hours, stumbling over roots and rocks, pushing through thorny thickets that seemed to grab at us with deliberate malice. The darkness was complete. No moon, no stars visible through the canopy, just the faint blue glow that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath, the silence was absolute. No footsteps behind us, no voices calling our names. Just the sound of our own labored breathing and the rapid beating of our hearts. "Are they gone?" Sarah whispered. Before I could answer, we heard David's voice again, but this time it was coming from above us. "Mike! Sarah! Where are you? I've been looking everywhere." We looked up to see David hanging upside down from a tree branch about 15 feet above us, his arms dangling loose, his head twisted at an angle that should have broken his neck. But he was smiling and talking as if nothing was wrong. "Come on, guys, the joke's over. Emma's really hurt?" Sarah made a choking sound and stumbled backward. I grabbed her arm and pulled her deeper into the forest. We ran again, this time with no direction or plan, just desperate to get away from the thing that wore our friend's face and spoke with his voice. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, until we collapsed in another clearing that looked exactly like all the others. Dawn came suddenly, like someone turning on a light switch. One moment we were in complete darkness. The next, we were sitting in pale gray morning light. The forest around us looked normal, just trees and undergrowth, no twisted shapes or blue glow. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said. She was shaking uncontrollably. Whether from cold or terror, I couldn't tell. I checked my GPS one more time. For the first time in days, it showed actual topographic information. We were about 8 miles northeast of where we'd started, in a section of the Cherokee National Forest that was marked as restricted access. More importantly, I could see a trail on the map, a real, marked trail about 2 miles due south of our position. "This way," I said, showing Sarah the screen. We gathered what supplies we could find. Most of our gear had been scattered or destroyed during our flight through the forest, and started hiking south. The going was difficult, through dense underbrush and steep terrain, but at least the forest felt normal again. Birds were singing, insects buzzed in the warm morning air, and the oppressive silence that had haunted us for days was broken. After about an hour, we found the trail. It was clearly marked with official Forest Service blazes, and according to my GPS, it would take us back to the main road in about 6 miles. We hiked in silence, both of us jumping at every sound, but the trail was well maintained and clearly marked. Other hikers had been this way recently. We could see footprints in the muddy sections and fresh blazes on the trees. As we walked, I found myself looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see David following us with that terrible smile. But the trail behind us remained empty. It took us 4 hours to reach the road. 4 hours of normal hiking through normal forest, past normal landmarks that appeared on our maps and GPS exactly where they should be. When we finally saw the parking area through the trees, Sarah broke down crying. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, covered in 3 days' worth of fallen leaves, but otherwise undisturbed. I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. As we drove back toward town, Sarah finally spoke. "What happened to David?" I didn't have an answer. The rational part of my mind wanted to believe that our friend was still alive, maybe lost in the forest, maybe suffering from some kind of psychological break. But I knew better. Whatever we'd encountered in that valley, whatever had been calling to us with the voices of our dead loved ones, it had taken David that first night and left something else in his place. We reported him missing when we got back to town. Search and rescue teams spent weeks combing the Cherokee National Forest, but they never found any trace of him. The coordinates David had given us led to an area that, according to official maps, didn't exist. The GPS coordinates pointed to a section of private land that had been closed to public access for over 50 years. When I pressed the search coordinator for more information, he told me there were no records of any waterfalls in that area, no old hunting trails, no geographical features that matched our description of the valley where we'd been trapped. "It's like the place you're describing simply doesn't exist," he said. "But I know it exists. Sarah knows it exists. And somewhere in that place that doesn't appear on any map, something is still wearing David's face, still calling out to lost hikers with voices they'll recognize, still luring them deeper into a forest that follows rules older and crueler than anything human beings were meant to understand." Sarah moved to Seattle a month after we got back. She couldn't stand being in Tennessee anymore. Couldn't stand the sight of the mountains on the horizon. We don't talk much. When we do, we avoid mentioning the trip, avoid mentioning David's name. But sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls from numbers I don't recognize. When I answer, I hear David's voice on the other end, cheerful and normal, asking me when we're going to plan our next camping trip. "Come on, Mike," the voice says. "It'll be fun. I know this great place in the Cherokee National Forest, hidden waterfall that most people don't know about. What do you say?" I always hang up. But the calls keep coming. And sometimes, when I'm hiking alone on trails near home, I hear voices calling my name from the forest. Sarah's voice, asking me to come find her. David's voice, promising me that Emma is waiting. My mother's voice, telling me she loves me and misses me and just wants to see me one more time. I never follow the voices, but they're getting harder to resist. Last week, I found myself standing at the edge of a trail I'd never seen before, even though I've hiked this area hundreds of times. The path led into a section of forest that looked older and darker than the woods around it, and I could swear I heard the distant sound of running water. Whispering Falls, maybe. The waterfall David had promised us we'd find. I turned around and hiked back to my truck as fast as I could, but the trail is still there. I can see it on satellite images when I look up the area online. A thin line leading into a blank section of forest that doesn't appear on any topographic maps. I haven't gone back, but I think about it. Every day, I think about it. Because somewhere in that forest that exists between the spaces on our maps, David is waiting for me. And he's not alone anymore. The voices tell me Sarah's there too now. They tell me my mother is there, and Emma, and everyone else I've ever lost or left behind. They tell me the waterfall really is beautiful, that it's everything David promised it would be. They tell me all I have to do is follow the sound of their voices, and I'll never be lost again. But I know better. I know what's really waiting in that place between the marked trails and the mapped territories of our world. I know, but the voices are getting louder, and the loneliness is getting harder to bear. And sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, I find myself wondering if being lost forever might not be so bad, if it means never being alone again. The trail is still there, waiting for me. It's always there, waiting. And one day, when the voices become too loud and the loneliness too much to bear, I think I might just follow them home. My name is James Anderson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the fall of 2023, deep in the Cherokee National Forest of Tennessee, on a trail that doesn't appear on any official map anymore. I should have known something was wrong when Marcus suggested we hike the Hollow Trail. He'd found it mentioned in some obscure online forum, a hidden gem that promised untouched wilderness and views most tourists never see. The very fact that our GPS couldn't locate it should have been our first warning, but we were cocky. 3 friends from college reuniting for what we called our annual adventure weekend. Me, Marcus Chen, and David Santos. We'd done this for 8 years running, ever since graduation, always pushing ourselves to find more remote, more challenging destinations. The Cherokee National Forest stretched endlessly around us as we parked at what Marcus insisted was the correct trailhead, though the weathered wooden sign was so faded I couldn't make out any words. The October air bit at our skin, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded me of overripe fruit left too long in the sun. "You sure this is it?" David asked, shouldering his pack. At 29, he was the youngest of our group, still carrying that optimistic energy that made him volunteer for every dangerous assignment at his job as a wildfire photographer. His enthusiasm had gotten us into trouble before. Marcus consulted his phone for the dozenth time, frowning at the screen. "GPS is acting weird, but this has to be it. Look." He showed us a screenshot he'd taken of the forum post. The description mentioned a narrow dirt parking area exactly like where we stood, surrounded by towering oaks with a barely visible trail entrance. I studied the tree line. There, a gap between two massive trunks, so slight it could have been a deer path. "That's supposed to be a hiking trail? The best ones always start that way," Marcus said, his dark eyes gleaming with the same excitement that had convinced us to rappel into that slot canyon in Utah 2 years ago. "Trust me, this is going to be epic." The first few hours of hiking felt normal. The narrow path wound through dense forest, occasionally opening onto small clearings where autumn sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. We fell into our usual rhythm, Marcus leading with his confident stride, David in the middle documenting everything with his camera, and me bringing up the rear, always the cautious one. But as the afternoon progressed, subtle wrongness began to creep in. The forest felt too quiet. Not the peaceful silence of deep wilderness, but the oppressive hush that comes before a storm. No bird songs, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even our own footsteps seemed muffled, absorbed by the thick carpet of leaves. "Anyone else notice we haven't seen any wildlife?" I asked during our first water break. David lowered his camera, looking around. "Now that you mention it, yeah. Usually I'd have photographed a dozen birds by now." Marcus waved dismissively. "It's hunting season. They're probably keeping their heads down." But I'd been hunting these mountains since I was 12 with my grandfather. Even during hunting season, you'd see something. A squirrel, a chipmunk, at least insects buzzing around. Here, nothing moved except us. We pressed on. The trail began to descend into what Marcus called the Hollow, a narrow valley carved between two ridgelines. The temperature dropped noticeably as we lost the sun, and the trees grew taller, their trunks so wide our arms couldn't span them. Some looked ancient beyond measure, their bark scarred and twisted into almost human-like faces. "Check this out," David called, pointing his camera at one of the massive oaks. "The bark pattern here looks like—" He paused, squinting through his viewfinder. "Like a screaming face." I joined him, studying the tree. The resemblance was unsettling. Two hollow knots for eyes, a vertical split in the bark forming a mouth frozen in eternal anguish. But what made my skin crawl was the realization that several other trees nearby bore similar patterns. An entire grove of screaming faces, watching our descent into their domain. "Nature's pareidolia," Marcus said, using the scientific term for seeing faces in random patterns. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. By late afternoon, we'd hiked deeper into the hollow than any of us had anticipated. The trail had become increasingly difficult to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely before reappearing yards away in a different direction. We relied on Marcus's compass and his uncanny sense of direction, but even he seemed uncertain. "We should start looking for a campsite," I suggested, noting how quickly the shadows were lengthening. In these deep hollows, darkness came early and stayed late. "Already on it," Marcus replied, but I noticed him checking his phone again, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Signal's been dead for hours. GPS isn't working at all anymore." We found what seemed like a suitable clearing as the sun touched the ridge above us. It was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by those ancient trees. The ground was surprisingly clear of undergrowth, just packed earth and scattered leaves. Something about the space felt intentional, like it had been prepared for visitors. Setting up camp took longer than usual. Our normally reliable gear seemed to fight us at every turn. David's tent poles bent when they should have held firm. My sleeping bag zipper caught and nearly broke. Marcus spent 20 minutes trying to get his camp stove to light, cursing under his breath as match after match failed to catch. "Maybe try building a fire instead," I suggested, grateful for the excuse to gather wood and get away from the oppressive feeling of being watched. But when Marcus finally got a fire, started using some emergency fuel tablets, the flames burned wrong. Instead of the normal orange and yellow, they flickered blue and green, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of the flame source. We stared at it in silence for several minutes. "Mineral deposits in the wood," David said finally, though his voice was uncertain. "Copper or something?" "Right," Marcus agreed quickly. "That has to be it." None of us mentioned that we'd used the same type of wood we'd been burning safely for years. Dinner was a subdued affair. Our usual camping banter felt forced, our laughter too loud in the oppressive silence. As full darkness settled over the hollow, the wrongness became impossible to ignore. The darkness here wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living thing that pressed against our small circle of firelight, testing its boundaries. "Did you guys hear that?" David whispered suddenly. We froze, listening. At first I heard nothing, then gradually became aware of a sound just at the edge of perception. Breathing. Slow, deep inhalations and exhalations, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire. "Wind through the trees," Marcus said, but his hand had moved to the knife on his belt. The breathing continued, sometimes seeming to come from one direction, sometimes another. Occasionally it would stop entirely, leaving us in suffocating silence before resuming from a completely different location. "I'm going to check the perimeter," I said, reaching for my headlamp. "No." Marcus's voice was sharp. "We stay together. Whatever's out there, it wants us to split up." I wanted to argue, to maintain the illusion that we were rational men dealing with a rational situation. But deep in my gut, I knew he was right. Something was watching us from the darkness, something patient and hungry. We took turns on watch that night, though none of us really slept. During my shift around 2 in the morning, I heard new sounds. Footsteps circling our camp, always staying just beyond the reach of our firelight. Sometimes they sounded human, the soft scuff of boots on packed earth. Other times they were different, heavier, with an odd quality I couldn't identify. When David's turn came, he woke us with urgent whispers. "There's something at the edge of the clearing. I can see eyes reflecting the firelight." We all stared into the darkness where he pointed, and for a moment I saw them too. 2 pale green dots hovering about 6 feet off the ground. They watched us with predatory stillness before blinking out. "Deer," Marcus said automatically, but his voice cracked on the word. "Deer eyes reflect white, not green," David replied, "and they were too high up, too far apart." We fed the fire until dawn, none of us willing to admit what we all suspected, that we weren't alone in this hollow, and whatever shared it with us wasn't natural. Morning brought no relief. Our packs had been disturbed in the night despite our vigilance. Food was missing, not taken, but rotted, as if it had aged weeks in a few hours. My spare socks had somehow turned to fabric so decayed they crumbled at my touch. "We're leaving," I declared, stuffing my ruined gear into my pack. "Right now." But when we looked for the trail that had brought us here, it was gone. The clear path we'd followed down into the hollow had vanished, leaving only unbroken forest. We spent 2 hours searching the perimeter of our clearing, finding nothing but impenetrable undergrowth and sheer rock faces. "This is impossible," David said, his usual optimism finally cracking. "The trail was right there. It can't just disappear." Marcus was studying his compass with growing alarm. "The needle's spinning. Look at this. It won't hold direction." I watched the needle swing wildly, pointing north, then south, then spinning in complete circles. My own compass behaved the same way, as if the magnetic field itself had gone insane. "We'll navigate by the sun," I decided. "Follow the ridgeline until we find another way out." But as we attempted to climb out of the hollow, we discovered another impossibility. No matter which direction we traveled, no matter how carefully we maintained our bearing, we always ended up back at our clearing. Sometimes we'd realize it immediately, recognizing the distinctive arrangement of trees. Other times we'd walk for hours before emerging into that familiar circular space, our own footprints still visible in the packed earth. By the 3rd day, we were running low on water and hope. The supernatural torments had escalated. We'd wake to find our sleeping bags unzipped from the inside, as if something had crawled out of them during the night. Our food continued to rot at an impossible rate. The compass needles not only spun wildly but sometimes pointed straight down, as if magnetic north lay somewhere beneath our feet. But the worst part was the sounds. They'd grown bolder, closer. During the day, we heard whispers in languages we didn't recognize, coming from empty air. At night, children's laughter echoed through the trees, stopping abruptly whenever we tried to locate its source. "We're being played with," David said on the fourth morning, his usual professional composure completely gone. He'd aged years in just a few days, his eyes hollow and rimmed with red. "Something is keeping us here for its own amusement." Marcus hadn't spoken much since the second day. He sat staring into the cold ashes of our fire, his compass clutched in white-knuckled hands. Occasionally he'd mumble about magnetic anomalies and mineral deposits, clinging to scientific explanations like prayer. That afternoon, while we were attempting another escape route, David simply vanished. One moment he was walking beside me, the next he was gone. No scream, no sound of struggle, no disturbance in the leaf litter. I called out and spun in a circle, but the forest had swallowed him completely. "David!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "David, where are you?" We searched frantically until dark, calling his name, following every game trail and gap in the undergrowth. But the hollow seemed to have expanded somehow, grown larger and more labyrinthine. Paths that had been straight now curved back on themselves. Clearings we'd never seen before opened suddenly in front of us, only to vanish when we tried to retrace our steps. When we finally returned to our camp, exhausted and terrified, we found David sitting by the cold fire pit. "There you are," he said with a smile. "I was wondering where you'd gone." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by unease. Something was wrong with his voice. It was David's voice, but flattened somehow, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. "Where were you?" Marcus demanded. "We looked everywhere." David's smile never wavered. "I went to get water. Found a stream about a mile north. Beautiful spot." "There is no stream north of here," I said slowly. "We've been over every inch of this hollow." "Must have missed it," David replied, and that wrongness in his voice became more pronounced. He wasn't blinking enough. His eyes stayed fixed on our faces with uncomfortable intensity. Marcus stepped closer to the fire pit. "David, what's my middle name?" "Chen," David answered without hesitation. "That's Marcus's last name," I said, my hand moving instinctively to the knife on my belt. "What's Marcus's middle name?" David's smile finally flickered, but only for a moment. "James," he said. "That's my first name." My voice was barely a whisper. The thing wearing David's face tilted its head at an angle that was just slightly too far, like a bird studying an insect. "Is it?" it asked in David's voice. Marcus grabbed a burning branch from our fire, holding it up like a weapon. In the wavering light, I could see that David's eyes weren't reflecting the flame properly. They absorbed the light, pulling it in like twin black holes. "What did you do with our friend?" Marcus demanded. "Friend." The David thing's head tilted further, now at an impossible angle. "Which friend would that be?" I reached slowly for my headlamp, never taking my eyes off the creature. When I flicked it on and pointed the beam directly at its face, it recoiled with a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. But in that brief moment of illumination, I saw what it really was. David's face was there, but it was wrong, like a photograph that had been poorly pasted over something else. The edges didn't quite match. Underneath, glimpses of something else showed through. Skin like tree bark, eyes that were holes leading into infinite darkness, teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "Marcus, run," I whispered. The thing that wasn't David lunged. I threw myself sideways, rolling away from its grasping hands. Marcus swung his burning branch, and where it struck the creature's arm, the false skin peeled away like old wallpaper. Underneath was something made of shadow and malice, something that had never been human. We ran. Behind us, the David thing made sounds of pursuit. Sometimes the footfalls of running boots, sometimes the wet slithering of something without legs, sometimes the rapid scratch of claws on stone. Its voice followed us too, calling our names in David's voice, begging us to come back, telling us it was hurt and needed help. "Don't listen," Marcus gasped as we crashed through the undergrowth. "Whatever you do, don't listen to it." But the voice was so perfectly David's, so filled with pain and confusion. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to help my friend. Only the memory of those wrong eyes, those too many teeth, kept me running. We burst into a clearing I'd never seen before, much larger than our camp. In the center stood a massive oak, so old and vast that its trunk disappeared into the darkness above. Its bark was covered in symbols, not carved but grown into the wood itself, like living tattoos. "The tree," Marcus whispered. "It's the source. Everything wrong here comes from that tree." As if responding to his words, the symbols began to glow with sickly phosphorescence. The air around the tree shimmered like heat waves, and I realized we could see through it into somewhere else, a place of red sky and screaming winds, where things that had never been human danced around fires made of bone. "A door," I breathed. "It's a door between worlds." The David thing emerged from the forest behind us, no longer bothering to maintain its disguise. It was tall and wrong, with arms that bent in too many places and a face that was a shifting collage of every person it had ever consumed. I saw David there, and others, hikers who had found this hollow before us, who had fed this creature's hunger. "You cannot leave," it said in a chorus of stolen voices. "You belong here now. You belong to me." Marcus stepped toward the tree, his face set with desperate determination. "If we can close the door—" "Marcus, no!" I lunged for him, but I was too late. The creature struck him with one impossibly long arm, and I watched in horror as something dark and oily flowed from its fingertips into Marcus's chest. He convulsed once, then went rigid. When he turned to face me, his eyes were the same wrong black holes I'd seen in the David thing. "Hello, James," he said in Marcus's voice, but with that same flattened recorded quality. "Why don't you come closer?" I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. Two of my closest friends, both taken, both turned into something hungry and alien. The creature in the center began to approach, wearing Marcus's face now, while the David thing circled around to cut off my retreat. That's when I remembered the fuel tablets in my pack, the ones Marcus had used to light our first fire. Waterproof, burns incredibly hot, designed to ignite even in adverse conditions. I'd seen military demonstrations where they'd melted through metal. "You want me?" I shouted, backing toward the great tree. "Come and get me." They came together, the Marcus thing and the David thing, moving with predatory coordination. At the last second, I dodged sideways and pressed 2 fuel tablets against the glowing symbols on the tree trunk. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The tablets ignited on contact with the otherworldly energy, burning white-hot. The symbols flared and began to blacken, their light fading. The shimmer in the air around the tree intensified, becoming a howling vortex. The creature shrieked, not with the stolen voices of my friends, but with its own voice, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars. The false faces of David and Marcus melted away, revealing the writhing shadow thing underneath. It reached for me with desperate hunger, but the pull of the collapsing doorway was stronger. I felt it too, a tugging sensation, as if the tree were trying to drag me into that red sky hell on the other side. But I was human, not a creature of that dark place. The pull affected me less than it did the thing that had taken my friends. I watched it stretch like taffy as the vortex pulled it toward the tree. Its howls grew more desperate, more enraged. In its writhing mass, I caught glimpses of faces. David and Marcus, yes, but dozens of others. All the hikers who had found this hollow, all the people who had fed its endless hunger over the years. "I'm sorry," I whispered to my friends' faces in that shifting darkness. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." The tree trunk split with a sound like thunder. The vortex collapsed inward, taking the creature with it. For a moment, the clearing was filled with impossible light. Then everything went dark. When I woke, I was lying on a Park Service rescue helicopter, an oxygen mask over my face. The ranger leaning over me had kind eyes and a weathered face. "You're safe now," she said. "We found you at the old Chattahoochee trailhead, unconscious and severely dehydrated. You've been missing for 6 days." 6 days. We'd been in the hollow for 4. "My friends," I croaked through the mask. "David Santos and Marcus Chen. They were with me." The ranger's expression grew somber. "I'm sorry. We found some of their gear scattered in the forest, but no sign of them. The search is ongoing." They never found David and Marcus. Officially, they were listed as missing, presumed dead in a hiking accident. The investigators theorized that we'd become separated in the dense forest, that exposure and dehydration had caused me to hallucinate the events I described. But they couldn't explain why my compass still spins wildly whenever I'm in deep forest. They couldn't explain the photographs on David's camera, dozens of images of that hollow, that clearing, that impossible tree, all of them showing completely empty forest when developed. They couldn't explain why the GPS coordinates I gave them led to a solid rock face with no trail in sight. Most of all, they couldn't explain why, 3 months later, I received a postcard with no return address. The image was of the Cherokee National Forest, and on the back, in David's handwriting, were 3 words: "Come back soon." I moved to Phoenix after that. Desert as far as the eye can see, nothing but sand and sky and blessed normal emptiness. But sometimes, on moonless nights when the darkness feels too thick, I hear whispers in the wind. Voices I recognize calling my name, begging me to come home. And sometimes, God help me, I want to answer. My name is James Anderson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the fall of 2023, and I know I'll never be the same, because somewhere in the mountains of Tennessee, in a hollow that doesn't appear on any map, something is still waiting, something that wears the faces of my friends, something that knows my name, something that's very, very patient. The doctors say the nightmares will fade with time. The therapists say the guilt over surviving when my friends didn't will eventually lessen. They give me pills for the anxiety, techniques for managing the flashbacks, but none of them understand that this isn't trauma from a hiking accident. This is the mark of something that let me go on purpose, something that wants me to remember, to suffer, to eventually come back. Because I know now what that creature really was. Not some ancient forest spirit or interdimensional predator, but something much worse. Something that feeds on more than just flesh and blood. It feeds on memory, on the connections between people, on love turned to loss. And by letting me escape, by taking my friends and leaving me behind to mourn them, it ensured that it would never go hungry again. Every day I think about David and Marcus. Every night I dream about what happened to them. I'm feeding it. Every time someone asks about my missing friends, every time I see their faces in my mind, I'm sending it exactly what it needs to stay strong. The worst part is that I can feel it getting stronger. The nightmares are more vivid now. The whispered voices clearer. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and pine needles in my hair, though I live in a 6th-floor apartment in the heart of Phoenix. Last week, I found a trail map of the Cherokee National Forest tucked under my windshield wiper. This week, it was a compass, an old brass one that points steadily south no matter which way I turn it. Southeast, to be precise. Toward the mountains of Tennessee. I know what it wants. I know what it's asking. And God help me, I'm starting to think about it. About going back. About ending this once and for all, one way or another. Because living like this isn't really living at all. It's just slowly dying. One memory at a time. One nightmare at a time. While something that shouldn't exist grows fat on my pain. The people at work think I'm getting better. They see me smile during meetings, hear me laugh at jokes in the break room. They don't know that I'm counting down the days until my vacation time resets. They don't know about the camping gear I've been slowly acquiring, or the research I've been doing into Cherokee folklore. They don't know that sometimes in the deepest part of the night I hear my friends calling to me across impossible distances. Not the creature wearing their faces, but really them, trapped somewhere in that red sky hell, begging me to come back and save them. And maybe that's just another lie the creature tells to draw me back. Maybe David and Marcus are really gone, consumed completely, and what I'm hearing is just another form of bait. But maybe they're not. Maybe there's still time to save them. Maybe there's still a way to close that door permanently to send that thing back where it came from. Maybe I'm the only one who can. My name is James Anderson, and I am 32 years old. In 3 weeks, I'll be taking a vacation to Tennessee. I've already booked the hotel room, planned the route, prepared my gear, and if you're reading this, it probably means I never came back. Don't look for me. Don't send anyone after me. Because whatever you do, don't go to the Cherokee National Forest looking for a trail that doesn't appear on any map. Don't look for a hollow where the trees have faces and the darkness has teeth. Don't go looking for the place where something patient and hungry waits to add your face to its collection. Just remember us as we were, and try not to dream about the mountains. Try not to hear the whispers in the wind. Try not to answer when they call your name.